The parking garage was empty except for two people and a truth that had been running for 6 months. Daniel Reed's hand froze on his car door when he heard her voice cut through the concrete silence. "Why are you avoiding me?" He didn't turn around, couldn't, because Clara Whitmore, his CEO, his daily torment, the woman whose eyes carried ghosts he'd helped create, was finally asking the question he'd spent half a year dodging. And the answer? The answer was going to destroy the carefully constructed walls between his past as a first responder and his present as a man just trying to survive. Before we dive into Daniel's story, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels, and if it moves you, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Now, let's go back to that parking garage where everything Daniel had been running from finally caught up. The fluorescent lights in sublevel 3 of the Whitmore Industries parking structure hummed with the kind of persistent drone that made silence feel aggressive. Daniel Reed had learned every acoustic quirk of this space over the past 6 months. Which pillars echoed footsteps, which elevator banks chimed 30 seconds before opening, which route to his car provided the maximum warning time if someone was approaching, especially if that someone was Clara Whitmore. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, and Daniel had timed his arrival with the precision of a man whose survival depended on patterns. Clara typically arrived at 7:15, parked on sublevel 2 near the executive elevator, and went straight to her office on the 14th floor. Daniel parked on sublevel 3, used the north stairwell, and was at his desk in the analytics department by 7 a.m. sharp. Their paths never crossed. Not accidentally, anyway. He'd engineered it that way. Daniel's fingers were already wrapped around his car door handle, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, his travel mug of coffee balanced in his other hand. His daughter Mia's latest school photo smiled at him from behind the windshield, gap-toothed, proud, wearing the purple shirt she'd insisted matched her backpack. 9 years old and already smarter than he'd ever be about what mattered. He was thinking about her, about the permission slip he needed to sign for the Science Museum trip, when he heard the footsteps. Not the usual scattered echoes of early arrivals. These were deliberate, approaching. The kind of footsteps that knew exactly where they were going. Daniel's whole body went rigid. "Mr. Reed?" The voice was calm, measured, with an edge of something that might have been exhaustion or might have been determination. Daniel had spent 6 months making sure he never had to hear that voice directed at him, and now it was cutting through the parking garage air like a blade through water. He didn't turn around. "Mr. Reed, I know you can hear me." Clara Whitmore's heels clicked against the concrete, closer now. Daniel could see her reflection in his car window, dark blazer, hair pulled back, shoulders set in a way that meant she wasn't leaving until she got what she'd come for. "I'm late for—" Daniel started, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "You're 43 minutes early, actually," Clara interrupted. "Same as every Tuesday. Same as every day for the past 6 months. Daniel's jaw tightened. His hand on the door handle was white-knuckled. "I need to go." "No." Clara's reflection stepped closer. "You need to answer a question. I don't— Why are you avoiding me?" The words hit the concrete and bounced back amplified. "Why are you avoiding me?" The question Daniel had known was coming eventually, the one he'd restructured his entire professional life to never have to answer. He still didn't turn around. "Miss Whitmore, I have reports due." "Daniel?" Her voice softened, just barely, but enough that it hurt worse than the formality. 6 months. You've been working here for 6 months, and you've never once made eye contact with me in a meeting. You take the stairs when I use the elevator. You eat lunch at your desk. You leave through the loading dock. I've watched you walk 3 blocks out of your way to avoid passing my office. Daniel's throat felt like someone had filled it with sand. "You're a senior analyst," Clara continued, and now there was something raw creeping into her professional tone. "You report directly to my VP of operations. You're brilliant at your job. Marcus says you've streamlined our data systems in ways that saved us millions. But you won't attend any meeting I'm in. You send proxies. You submit reports through intermediaries. I prefer to work independently." Stop. Clara's reflection moved, and suddenly she wasn't behind him anymore. She was beside his car, one hand on the hood, positioned so that if he opened his door, he'd have to face her. "Stop running. Just for 5 minutes. Stop running and tell me why." Daniel finally looked at her. It was a mistake. It was always a mistake, because Clara Whitmore had her sister's eyes. Not exactly. Sophie had been younger, softer somehow, with laugh lines that Clara's executive severity hadn't yet earned. But the shape, the color, that particular shade of gray-blue that looked silver in certain light, those were Sophie's eyes looking back at him. Those were the eyes he'd watched go still in the rain while his hands had been covered in her blood and his radio had screamed for backup that came too late. "Because seeing you hurts," Daniel said. The words came out before he could stop them, before he could craft something professional and distant, before he could rebuild the walls he'd spent 6 months reinforcing. They came out raw and honest and final. Clara's expression didn't change immediately. For a long moment, she just stood there, one hand still on his car hood, her gray-blue eyes, Sophie's eyes, searching his face like she was reading a language she'd almost forgotten. "Explain that," she said quietly. "I can't." "Yes, you can." Clara's voice was steady, but Daniel could hear the hairline fractures in it. "You're going to. Because I've spent 6 months wondering if I did something wrong, if I said something in the interview that made you uncomfortable, if there's some professional boundary I crossed without realizing, and now you're telling me that seeing me hurts, and I need you to explain what that means." Daniel set his coffee mug on the roof of his car because his hand was starting to shake. "Ms. Whitmore, Clara." "Ms. Whitmore," Daniel repeated firmly, "this isn't a conversation we should have in a parking garage before 7 in the morning." "Then where?" Clara challenged. "Your office. You're never there when I walk by. The conference room? You send other people. Email? You keep your responses to 3 sentences or less." She pushed off from his car, and Daniel saw something flash across her face. Frustration, maybe, or something closer to pain. "You've made yourself a ghost in this building, and I want to know why. I'm doing my job. You're hiding." Clara cut him off, and now her voice had an edge that reminded Daniel she hadn't become CEO of a mid-sized tech company by accepting evasion. "You're one of the most talented analysts we have, and you're hiding. From me, specifically. So either explain it, or I'm going to assume it's something I need to address as your employer, and this becomes an HR conversation." Daniel felt something crack in his chest, not break. He'd learned the difference between cracking and breaking 6 years ago on a rain-slicked highway. This was just a crack, just a small fissure in the dam he'd built between his before life and his afterlife. "It's not professional," he said finally, quietly. Clara's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Is it personal?" "Yes." "Did we know each other? Before?" Daniel's laugh came out bitter and broken. "No, God, no. If we'd known each other before, you never would have hired me." "Then I don't understand." "Sophie," Daniel said. The name hung in the parking garage like smoke. Daniel watched it land, watched Clara's face go completely still, watched her hand slip from the car hood as she took an involuntary step backward. "What did you say?" "Sophie." Daniel made himself hold her gaze even though it felt like staring into the sun. "Sophie Whitmore, your sister. That's why I can't look at you. That's why I avoid you. Because every time I see your face, I see hers, and I see—" His voice broke. "I see what I couldn't save." The parking garage was so quiet Daniel could hear the ventilation system cycling air through distant ducts. Clara had gone completely pale, one hand rising to her throat in a gesture that was probably unconscious. "You—" She stopped, started again. "You were there?" "I was first on scene," Daniel said, and suddenly all the words he'd been holding back for 6 months were pouring out like water through a broken levee. "March 14th, 2019. Highway 89, mile marker 42. Multiple vehicle collision, drunk driver crossed the median into oncoming traffic. I was 3 minutes out when the call came in." Clara was shaking her head slowly, like she could reverse the information if she just moved carefully enough. "The file said the responders were—" "Redacted," Daniel finished. "Standard protocol for first responders in fatal accidents. Names get kept confidential unless there's legal action." He pressed his palms against his car roof, kneading the cold metal to ground him. I transferred to EMT duty 6 months before that night. Before that, I was a paramedic for 4 years. Thought I'd seen everything. Thought I was prepared for anything. Daniel, she was still conscious when I got there, Daniel continued, and he couldn't stop now, couldn't put the words back in. The drunk driver, he walked away without a scratch. Happens that way sometimes, but your sister's car had been T-boned on the driver's side, and the impact, he closed his eyes. The impact was catastrophic. Stop, Clara whispered. Please stop. I tried everything, Daniel said, opening his eyes to find tears on Clara's cheeks. I did everything right. Everything by protocol. But her injuries, the internal bleeding, the trauma, there was nothing anyone could have done. The ER doctors confirmed it later. Even if she'd been in the hospital when it happened, the outcome would have been the same. Why are you telling me this? Claire's voice was shaking now, all her CEO composure shattered. Why now? Why here? Because you asked, Daniel said simply. Because you wanted to know why I can't look at you without seeing her. Why every time you walk into a room, I have to leave. Why I restructured my entire professional life to avoid being near you. Clara wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so vulnerable it made Daniel's chest ache. What was she? Did she? Clara couldn't seem to finish the question. She wasn't alone, Daniel said softly. I held her hand. I talked to her. I told her the ambulance was coming, that she was going to be okay, even when I knew... His voice broke. Even when I knew I was lying, I told her she wasn't alone. She died on scene, Clara said, and it wasn't a question. She knew the official report. Daniel had read it himself later in the mandatory counseling sessions. They said she was unresponsive when they transported. Her heart stopped at 11:47 p.m., Daniel confirmed. I performed CPR for 6 minutes until the ambulance arrived. They got her rhythm back twice in transport, but she was gone before they reached the hospital. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Clara was openly crying now, one hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking with the force of trying to hold it together. Daniel wanted to reach out, wanted to offer comfort, but he couldn't move, couldn't bridge the space between them when he was the living reminder of her worst loss. I quit emergency response 2 weeks later, Daniel said into the silence. Couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't... He swallowed hard. I have a daughter, Mia. She was 3 when Sophie died. Single parent, just me and her. And I realized I couldn't keep doing a job where I came home with that kind of trauma and expected to be the stability she needed. So you became an analyst, Clara said through her tears. Data, numbers, nothing that bleeds, nothing that dies, Daniel corrected quietly. They stood there in the fluorescent half-light of the parking garage, the hum of ventilation and distant traffic, the only sounds. Daniel could see his breath fogging in the October chill. Could see Clara trying to pull herself back together, trying to find the executive composure she'd walked in with. When I came in for the interview, Daniel said after a long moment, I didn't know it was your company. Whitmore Industries. It's common enough. And you go by C.J. Whitmore professionally, Clara Jane. I didn't make the connection until the final interview, when you mentioned losing your sister in a car accident 6 years ago. You could have withdrawn, Clara said, her voice still rough with tears. I needed the job, Daniel admitted. Good insurance for Mia, stable hours, decent pay, and I thought, he laughed bitterly, I thought I could handle it. Thought I could just keep my head down, do good work, stay out of your way. I didn't expect what? Didn't expect you to notice, Daniel said honestly. Didn't expect the CEO of a company with 300 employees to care that one analyst was avoiding her. Clara's expression shifted into something Daniel couldn't quite read. You really don't know, do you? She said. Know what? Clara took a breath, seemed to steady herself. When she spoke again, her voice had found some of its professional edge, though her eyes were still red. I knew who you were before I hired you. The words didn't make sense at first. Daniel's brain tried to process them, to fit them into a framework that made logical sense, but they just hung there in the cold garage air. What? I knew, Clara repeated. Your name was in the report. It took me 3 years to get the full file. the one without redactions. I had to fight for it, had to prove family relationship, had to go through channels, but I got it, and your name was there. Daniel Reed, first responder, first on scene. Daniel felt like the concrete floor had dropped away beneath him. You knew. I knew when you applied for the position, Clara said. Marcus, my VP, he forwarded me your resume because your credentials were impressive, and I saw your name and She paused, searching for words. I needed to understand. Understand what? Daniel's voice came out strangled. Who you were, Clara said simply. The person who was with my sister when she died. The person whose hand she held. The person who promised her she wasn't alone. Fresh tears were sliding down her cheeks. I needed to see you, to know you, to understand what kind of person runs toward disaster when everyone else is running away. Daniel's hands were shaking now, full-body tremors he couldn't control. So you hired me to, what, study me? Observe me like some kind of experiment? I hired you because you were qualified, Clara said firmly, because your skills matched our needs, but yes, I also hired you because I needed... She stopped, swallowed. My grief has 1,000 questions, Daniel, and you're the only person alive who has some of the answers. I don't... Daniel started, but Clara held up a hand. I know you don't have all of them. I know you can't tell me why it happened or why it was her car and not someone else's, or why the drunk driver survived and she didn't. Clara's voice was shaking but determined. But you can tell me she wasn't alone. You can tell me someone held her hand. You can tell me that in her last moments there was someone there who cared. Of course I cared, Daniel said, his own voice breaking. She was a person. She was terrified. She was dying, and He had to stop, had to breathe. I've carried that night for 6 years. I've had nightmares about it. I quit my career over it. I can't even drive on Highway 89 anymore without having a panic attack. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make this worse for you. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel demanded. 6 months. You knew for 6 months who I was, and you never said anything. Because you were avoiding me, Clara pointed out. How was I supposed to bring it up? Email you? Hi, Daniel, I know you were there when my sister died. Want to grab coffee and discuss it? She shook her head. I kept waiting for the right moment, and then I realized you were actively running from me, and I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe seeing me was too painful. Maybe I was selfish for hiring you at all. You were, Daniel said bluntly. If I'd known you knew, I never would have taken this job. I know, Clara said. That's why I didn't tell you. The honesty of it was almost worse than deception would have been. Daniel pressed his palms harder against the car roof, needing the pressure to keep himself grounded. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. Now that we're here, now that it's all out in the open, what do you want? Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to know what she said. What? In those last minutes, Clara clarified, and her composure was cracking again. When you were with her, what did she say? What were her last words? Daniel felt his heart breaking all over again, the same way it had broken 6 years ago in the rain. Clara, please, she interrupted. The report said she was conscious for approximately 8 minutes after you arrived. The medical examiner's report said she would have been aware, lucid, so she must have said something, and I need... Her voice broke completely. I need to know what my sister's last words were. Daniel closed his eyes, and he was back there. Rain hammering the pavement, the sharp scent of gasoline and blood, the twisted metal and broken glass catching the emergency lights in fractured patterns. And Sophie Whitmore's face, pale and terrified, her lips moving around words he'd tried so hard to forget. She asked about her family, Daniel said finally, opening his eyes to find Clara watching him with desperate intensity. She asked if someone had called them, if they knew. What did you tell her? I told her yes, Daniel said. I told her they were on their way, that she just needed to hold on a little longer. But that was a lie, Clara said. We didn't get the call until after she was already gone. I know, Daniel admitted, but she needed to believe someone was coming, She needed that hope. Clara was crying silently now, tears streaming down her face. What else? She talked about you, Daniel said softly. She said your name, Clara. She said, "Tell Clara I'm sorry." Sorry? Clara's voice was anguished. Sorry for what? She didn't say, Daniel answered. She just kept saying it. Tell Clara I'm sorry. Tell Clara I love her. He had to stop, had to breathe through the tightness in his chest. And then she asked me to promise her something. What? She asked me to promise she wouldn't die alone, Daniel said, and the words hurt as much now as they had 6 years ago. She was terrified of being alone. So I held her hand, and I promised her I wouldn't leave, and I didn't. I stayed with her until he couldn't finish, didn't need to. Clara made a sound that was half sob, half gasp, and then she was moving, closing the distance between them and pulling Daniel into a hug that caught him completely off guard. He stood there frozen, while this woman he'd been avoiding for 6 months clung to him and cried into his shoulder with the kind of grief that had nowhere else to go. After a moment, a long, uncertain moment, Daniel's arms came up and wrapped around her shoulders. And he let himself cry too, for the first time since the mandatory counseling ended, for the first time since he'd convinced himself he had to be strong for Mia, for the first time since he'd buried it all under spreadsheets and data analysis and the safe distance of numbers. They stood there in the parking garage, two people bound by tragedy, and cried for Sophie Whitmore. When they finally pulled apart, Clara's mascara was ruined and Daniel's shirt was damp with tears. They both looked wrecked, raw, like they'd just survived something together instead of just discussing it. I'm sorry, Clara said, wiping at her face. That was unprofessional. I think we're past professional at this point, Daniel said roughly, his own eyes burning. Clara laughed, a broken sound that was more catharsis than humor. Yeah, I think we are. They stood there in silence for another moment, neither quite sure what came next. I should go, Daniel finally said, though he didn't move toward his car. Mia has early pickup today for a field trip, and I need to sign her permission slip before— Daniel, Clara interrupted gently, can I ask you something else? He tensed, but nodded. Why did you quit? Clara asked. Really? Was it just because of Sophie, or was there more? Daniel considered lying, considered brushing it off. But they'd come this far into the truth. Might as well finish it. I quit because I couldn't be the father Mia needed while doing that job, he said. Every call, every accident, every patient I couldn't save, I brought that home with me. And Mia was 3 years old, and she needed stability and presence and a dad who could tuck her in without seeing dead faces in the dark. He swallowed. Sophie's accident was the final straw. But the truth is I was already breaking. I just hadn't admitted it yet. Clara nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. She's lucky to have you, she said quietly. Mia, not every parent would choose their child over their career like that. It wasn't a choice, Daniel said. Or if it was the easiest one I ever made. Everything else, the job, the identity, the sense of purpose, none of that mattered compared to making sure she was okay. Is she? Clara asked. Okay? Daniel thought about Mia's gap-toothed smile, her confidence, the way she'd reminded him yesterday that he needed to wash her purple shirt because it was her favorite and she wanted to wear it to school today. Yeah, he said, and meant it. Yeah, she's okay. Better than okay. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. Clara smiled, genuine warmth breaking through the tear-stained grief. I'd like to meet her someday. If that would be all right. Daniel's first instinct was to say no, to keep that separation between his work life and his home life, between the past and the present. But looking at Clara now, exhausted, vulnerable, still carrying her sister's memory like a weight she'd never quite learned to set down, he found himself nodding. Maybe, he said. Someday. Clara's smile widened slightly. I'll take maybe. Daniel finally reached for his car door, needing to move, to break the intensity of the moment before it swallowed them both. I should really— Wait, Clara said. Before you go, I need you to know something. Daniel paused, hand on the door handle. I don't regret hiring you, Clara said firmly. Even knowing it's been painful for you, even knowing you've spent 6 months avoiding me, I don't regret it. Why not? Because you're good at what you do, Clara said. Because you've made this company better, and because... She hesitated, then pushed forward. Because watching you work, watching you care about details and people, and doing things right, watching you be meticulous and thoughtful and present, even when it's hard, it's helped me understand something about the person who was with Sophie that night. What's that? Daniel asked quietly. That she was in good hands, Clara said, fresh tears welling up. That the person holding her hand was someone who cared, who tried, who gave everything they had even when they knew it wasn't enough. She wiped at her eyes. That matters to me, more than you probably understand. Daniel felt his throat close up again. I wish I could have saved her, he said, the words he'd wanted to say for 6 years finally finding their way out. I wish I'd been faster, better, more prepared. I wish... I know, Clara interrupted gently. I know you do. But Daniel, you gave her something no one else could have. You gave her your presence, your promise. You made sure she wasn't alone. She took a shaky breath. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful to you for that. Daniel didn't know what to say, couldn't find words adequate to the moment, so he just nodded and Clara nodded back. And in that exchange, they found something that felt like understanding. Not forgiveness, neither of them needed to forgive the other, but understanding. Acceptance of a shared wound that had shaped both their lives in ways they were still discovering. I'll see you at work, Clara finally said, taking a step back toward her own car. And Daniel, you don't have to avoid me anymore. I know it's hard. I know seeing me brings it back, but... She paused. Maybe it doesn't have to be all pain. Maybe we can figure out how to coexist with it, together. Maybe, Daniel echoed, using her word from earlier. Clara smiled, sad but genuine. I'll take maybe. She walked away then, her heels clicking against the concrete in a rhythm that sounded less deliberate than before, more human, more vulnerable. Daniel got in his car and sat there for a long moment, his hands on the steering wheel, his daughter's photo smiling at him from the dashboard. The permission slip was in his bag. The field trip was today. Life kept moving forward whether he was ready or not, but for the first time in 6 months, the weight on his chest felt a little lighter. He pulled out his phone and texted Mia's school. Running a few minutes late, permission slip coming. Dad. Then he sat there in the parking garage, breathing, processing, letting himself feel the full weight of what had just happened. He'd told the truth. Clara had told the truth. And somehow, impossibly, the world hadn't ended. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe they could coexist with the pain. Maybe. Daniel started his car and headed up the ramp toward daylight, leaving sub-level 3 and 6 months of avoidance behind him. He didn't know what came next, didn't know how to navigate a world where Clara Whitmore knew who he was and he couldn't hide anymore. But he knew one thing for certain. He was done running, at least from this. Daniel made it to Mia's school by 7:52 a.m., permission slip signed and tucked into her backpack alongside the lunch he'd packed at 6:30 that morning, before everything in the parking garage had cracked open and spilled out. She'd hugged him tight at drop-off, purple shirt bright against the gray October morning, and told him she loved him with the unself-conscious certainty of a 9-year-old who still believed her dad could fix anything. He'd held on to that hug longer than usual. The drive back to Whitmore Industries felt different, the same route he took every day, the same traffic patterns, the same exit off the highway that led to the industrial park, where the company occupied a modest 4-story building, but different, like someone had adjusted the contrast on a photograph, making shadows darker and light sharper. Daniel parked on sub-level 3 again, old habits, muscle memory, but this time he didn't check the surrounding spaces for Clara's car. Didn't calculate exit routes or timing patterns. Just parked, grabbed his laptop bag, and headed for the north stairwell because it was closer, not because it was strategic. The analytics department occupied half of the 3rd floor, an open concept workspace with standing desks and glass-walled conference rooms that Daniel had always found too exposed. He preferred his corner desk near the windows, partially blocked by a filing cabinet that created the illusion of privacy. Marcus Chen, the VP of Operations and Daniel's direct supervisor, had commented once that Daniel had built himself a fortress. Daniel hadn't corrected him. "Read!" Marcus's voice cut across the morning quiet as Daniel settled at his desk. "Conference room in 10. We've got the Q4 projections review." Daniel's fingers froze on his keyboard. "Is that the one with executive presence?" "Yeah," Marcus confirmed, already walking away. "Clara wants to sit in on this one. Supply chain's been bleeding money, and she wants to understand why before the board meeting next week." Of course she did. Daniel took a slow breath and pulled up the presentation files he'd been working on for the past 3 weeks. The data was solid. He'd triple-checked everything, cross-referenced against 5 years of historical trends, built predictive models that accounted for variables most analysts wouldn't even consider. The work was good, excellent even, but the thought of presenting it to Clara, of standing in a conference room while she watched him with those gray-blue eyes that were so much like her sister's, made his chest tight. 10 minutes later, Daniel walked into conference room B with his laptop and a printout of his findings. Marcus was already there, along with Jennifer Torres from Supply Chain and 2 junior analysts whose names Daniel could never quite remember. And Clara, sitting at the head of the table in a fresh blazer, not the one she'd been wearing in the parking garage, which meant she'd gone home to change after their conversation. Her eyes were still slightly red, makeup carefully reapplied but not quite hiding the evidence of earlier tears. Their eyes met for half a second before Daniel looked away, focusing on setting up his laptop. "Morning, everyone," Clara said, her voice back to its professional cadence. "Let's keep this efficient. Jennifer, I've read your preliminary report on the supply chain issues. Daniel, Marcus tells me you've done a deep analysis on the root causes. Walk me through it." Daniel connected his laptop to the conference room display and pulled up the first slide. Numbers, charts, clean visual representations of complex data. Safe territory. "The short version is we have a timing problem, not a vendor problem," Daniel began, falling into the familiar rhythm of analysis and presentation. "Our orders are going out on schedule, but they're hitting ports during peak congestion windows. We're losing an average of 18 days per shipment to dock delays." 18 days? Jennifer leaned forward. "That's more than double what we budgeted for." "Correct," Daniel confirmed, advancing to the next slide. "And it compounds. Delayed shipments mean delayed production runs, which means delayed fulfillment, which means penalty clauses kick in with our distributors. We've paid out approximately $2.3 million in penalties over the past 6 months." Marcus swore under his breath. Clara's expression didn't change, but Daniel saw her fingers tighten around her pen. "Solutions?" she asked. Daniel advanced to his recommendations slide, acutely aware that he was actually looking at her now, actually meeting her gaze across the conference table like a normal employee, instead of someone who'd spent 6 months treating her like a ghost. "3 options," he said. First, we renegotiate shipping windows with our current vendors to hit off-peak arrival times. That'll cost us about 4% more in shipping fees, but save us roughly 60% in delay-related penalties. Net positive of $1.6 million annually. "Option 2, Clara prompted. "We diversify our port entry points," Daniel continued. "Right now, 83% of our shipments come through Los Angeles Long Beach. If we split that across 3 ports, add Oakland and Seattle to the mix, we reduce congestion exposure and build in redundancy. Higher initial logistics complexity, but the risk mitigation is substantial." "And option 3? Daniel hesitated just slightly, because option 3 was the one he'd stayed up until 2 a.m. developing and wasn't entirely sure would be received well. "We build a predictive scheduling system," he said. "Real-time data integration with port congestion metrics, weather patterns, and historical trends. The system automatically adjusts our shipping schedules to optimize arrival times. It's more expensive up front. We'd need custom software development and dedicated monitoring, but long-term it gives us the most flexibility and the best cost efficiency." The room was quiet for a moment. Marcus was nodding slowly, already seeing the value. Jennifer looked skeptical but interested. And Clara was watching Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You built the prototype, didn't you?" Clara said. It wasn't really a question. Daniel nodded. "Show me." Daniel pulled up a different window, this one showing a working dashboard he'd coded over the past 2 weeks, using Python and AP. He'd had to teach himself to integrate properly. Real-time data feeds populated maps and charts, color-coded risk assessments updated every 30 seconds, and a simulation module showed projected outcomes based on different scheduling scenarios. "This is preliminary," Daniel said, navigating through the interface. "But it's functional. I've been running test simulations against our last quarter's actual shipments, and the predictive accuracy is sitting around 87%. With more historical data and some fine-tuning, I think we could push that over 90. "How long did this take you to build?" Marcus asked, leaning in to get a better look at the screen. "About 60 hours, Daniel admitted, mostly evenings and weekends." "You built this on your own time?" Claire's voice had a note in it that Daniel couldn't identify. "Why?" "Because I needed the distraction," Daniel thought. "Because sitting at home after Mia goes to bed means too much quiet and too many memories. Because building something constructive feels better than drowning in the past." "The problem interested me," he said instead, "and I wanted to see if it was solvable." Clara stood up and walked closer to the screen, studying the dashboard with the kind of focused intensity that reminded Daniel she hadn't built a successful company by accident. "This is remarkable," she said quietly. Then louder, to the room, "Jennifer, I want you working with Daniel to refine this. Marcus, budget approval for the software development and implementation. I want this operational by Q1. She turned back to Daniel. "How much support do you need?" "I can handle most of the development myself," Daniel said, "but I'll need someone from IT to help with server infrastructure and database architecture. And Jennifer's team will need to provide detailed historical data for training the prediction algorithms." "Done," Clara said immediately. "Whatever resources you need, you have them. This could save us millions annually." She paused, still looking at the screen. "Why didn't you propose this in your initial report?" Daniel felt heat creep up his neck. "I wasn't sure it would work. Didn't want to promise something I couldn't deliver." "But you built it anyway," Clara observed, "on your own time, without knowing if it would be implemented." "Like I said, the problem interested me." Clara turned to look at him directly, and for a moment the conference room and the other people in the professional context all faded away. It was just the two of them, the way it had been in the parking garage, connected by something deeper and more complicated than a business relationship. "Good work, Daniel," she said, and he heard the weight behind those 3 words, heard the acknowledgement that he was good at this, good at building things that mattered, good at more than just being the person who held her sister's hand while she died. "Thank you," he managed. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, dividing up action items and setting timelines. Daniel participated, answered questions, accepted Jennifer's surprisingly enthusiastic collaboration on the project, and through it all, he was aware of Clara's presence in a way he hadn't let himself be for 6 months. Not just as the CEO, not just as Sophie's sister, but as Clara. A person who led with intelligence and decisiveness, who asked sharp questions and saw through surface-level answers, who clearly cared deeply about the company she'd built and the people who worked for it. When the meeting ended and people filed out, Daniel started packing up his laptop. He was almost to the door when Clara's voice stopped him. "Daniel, a moment?" He turned. The conference room was empty now, just the two of them and the morning light coming through the windows. "I meant what I said in the garage," Clara said, staying on her side of the conference table like she was respecting a boundary. "You don't have to avoid me anymore. But I also don't want to make this harder for you than it needs to be. So if you need—" "I'm done avoiding you," Daniel interrupted. Then, softer, "I'm going to try to be done anyway. Can't promise it won't be difficult sometimes." "I can work with difficult," Clara said, the ghost of a smile crossing her face. "Difficult is better than invisible." Daniel found himself almost smiling back. "Yeah, I guess it is." He left the conference room and went back to his desk, where a mountain of actual work was waiting. The Q4 projections analysis had been the urgent priority, but he also had 3 other ongoing projects, a database migration to oversee, and now, apparently, a predictive scheduling system to develop into full production software. The work was good. The work made sense. Numbers and code and logical systems that behaved according to rules he could understand and control. Unlike everything else. Daniel was 3 hours deep in Python code when his phone buzzed with a text from Mia's school. "Field trip running late. Pickup will be 4:30 instead of 3:15. We'll keep you updated." He texted back a quick acknowledgement and returned to his code, trying to solve a particularly stubborn bug in the port congestion API integration. His concentration was so complete that he didn't notice Marcus approaching until his supervisor was standing directly beside his desk. "That thing you built," Marcus said without preamble. "It's going to change how we operate. You know that, right?" Daniel looked up from his screen. "It's just a scheduling optimization tool." "It's a competitive advantage," Marcus corrected. "The kind of thing that makes other companies wonder how we're consistently delivering faster than they are." He pulled up a chair and sat down. "How long have you been working here, Reed? 6 months?" "About that." "And in 6 months, you've streamlined our data architecture, identified a multi-million-dollar supply chain issue, and built proprietary software that solves it." Marcus shook his head. "Most analysts take 3 years to have that kind of impact." Daniel wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he focused on closing his laptop to give Marcus his full attention. "I'm recommending you for senior lead analyst," Marcus continued. "It comes with a significant raise, actual authority over project direction, and a seat in executive planning meetings." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Executive planning meetings? The ones Clara runs?" "Yeah, the Monday morning strategy sessions," Marcus confirmed. "Why? Is that a problem?" "Yes," Daniel thought, because sitting in a weekly meeting with Clara Whitmore sounded like an exercise in sustained emotional difficulty that he wasn't sure he was ready for. "No," he said aloud. "No problem. I appreciate the recommendation." "Good. I'll submit the promotion paperwork this afternoon." "You've earned it, Reed." Marcus stood up, then paused. "Can I ask you something? Off the record?" Daniel tensed, but nodded. "This morning, that presentation, that's the first time I've ever seen you actually engage with Clara directly," Marcus said carefully. "Usually you're looking anywhere else, keeping responses to absolute minimums. What changed?" Everything, Daniel thought. The parking garage confrontation, the truth about Sophie, 6 months of avoidance cracking open into something that might eventually resemble honesty. "Just decided to stop making it weird," Daniel said instead. Marcus studied him for a moment, clearly knowing there was more to it, but having the professionalism not to push. "Well, whatever it was, keep it up. You're better when you're not hiding." After Marcus left, Daniel sat at his desk and stared at his closed laptop. A promotion, executive planning meetings, more visibility, more responsibility, more time in Clara's orbit. 6 months ago, he would have declined. Would have found a reason to stay in his safe corner of the 3rd floor, where he could do good work without having to face the living reminder of his biggest failure. But he'd told Clara he was done running, and he'd meant it, even if he had no idea what not running looked like yet. The afternoon passed in a blur of code and database queries. Daniel made progress on the scheduling system, fixed 2 bugs in the current analytics platform, and responded to approximately 30 emails. At 4:15, he packed up his laptop and headed out to pick up Mia, taking the elevator this time instead of the stairs. Old Daniel would have calculated which elevator Clara was least likely to use. New Daniel just pressed the button and got in. The school parking lot was chaotic when he arrived, full of parents waiting for the delayed field trip return. Daniel found a spot near the back and settled in to wait, scrolling through his phone and trying not to think about executive planning meetings. When the bus finally arrived at 4:40, Mia came bounding off with her backpack bouncing and her purple shirt stained with what looked like pizza sauce. She threw herself at Daniel with the full-force enthusiasm of someone who'd had an excellent day. "Dad, we saw real dinosaur bones, and there was this robot that could answer questions, and they had a whole room about space, and Miss Carter said maybe we could go back next month for the planetarium show, and can we? Can we please?" Daniel caught her mid-bounce and pulled her into a proper hug, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and kid sweat and pizza. "Sounds like you had a good time," he said, smiling despite the weight of the day. "The best time." Mia pulled back to look at him seriously. "Are you okay? You look tired." 9 years old and already too perceptive for his own good. Daniel ruffled her hair. "I'm fine, kiddo. Just a long day at work. Come on, let's go home." They stopped at the grocery store on the way back because Daniel had forgotten to plan dinner and Mia lobbied hard for taco night. While she picked out tomatoes with intense concentration, Daniel's phone buzzed with an email notification. From C.J. Whitmore. Subject, Monday meeting, addition. Daniel Marcus submitted your promotion recommendation. It's approved, effective immediately. Congratulations, you've earned it. You're now on the distribution list for Monday executive planning meetings, 8 a.m. in the 4th floor conference room. First meeting is tomorrow. Agenda attached. Also attached, the full incident report from March 2019. I thought you might want it, if you don't already have it. No pressure to read it, but it's there if you need it. Thank you for this morning, for the honesty, for the work, for everything. C.J. Daniels stared at his phone screen, barely aware of Mia tugging on his sleeve and asking if they could also get ice cream. The incident report. The full file with his name in it, the one Clara had fought for 3 years to obtain. She was offering it to him like a gift, like something he might need or want, like access to the official documentation of the worst night of his life was an act of generosity instead of a fresh wound. Dad? Ice cream? Daniel looked down at his daughter, her gap-toothed smile expectant, and made himself smile back. Yeah, kiddo, ice cream sounds good. They got home at 6:15 and Mia immediately disappeared to her room to change out of the purple shirt and into pajamas because apparently field trips were exhausting. Daniel started pulling out ingredients for tacos, moving through the familiar routine of cooking while his mind spun through tomorrow's meeting, the promotion, the email attachment he hadn't opened yet. His phone buzzed again. Not an email this time, a text from a number he'd saved 6 months ago and never used. Clara. I should have asked before sending that file. I'm sorry, you don't have to open it. Daniel stared at the message, trying to figure out how to respond. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard, typed and deleted 3 different replies before settling on, Daniel. It's okay. Thank you for offering it. 3 dots appeared immediately, showing Clara was typing. They disappeared. Reappeared. Disappeared again. Finally, Clara. See you Monday at the meeting. And Daniel, you're going to be great at this new role. Daniel set his phone down and focused on browning ground beef, on shredding cheese, on setting out plates and calling Mia for dinner. They ate tacos at the small kitchen table, and Mia talked nonstop about dinosaur bones and space exhibits, and her friend Ashley, who had brought gummy bears to share on the bus. Normal. This was normal. This was the life he'd built after leaving emergency response. The life centered around bedtime routines and permission slips and making sure Mia had clean clothes for school. This was what mattered. But later, after Mia was asleep and the dishes were done and the apartment was quiet, Daniel sat on his couch and opened his laptop. The email from Clara was still there, unopened attachment sitting like a weight. He clicked it. The PDF loaded slowly, page after page of official documentation, incident number and date and location, vehicle descriptions and damage assessments, weather conditions, rain, heavy, visibility poor, timeline of events, minute by minute, victim information. Sophie Marie Whitmore, age 26, pronounced dead at 12:34 a.m. on March 15, 2019. And then, halfway through the report, his name. First responder on scene, Daniel Reed, EMT paramedic, badge number 4729. Arrival time, 11:39 p.m. Initial assessment. Single female victim, multiple traumatic injuries, conscious and alert but in severe distress. CPR initiated at 11:47 p.m. following cardiac arrest. Continued resuscitation attempts until ambulance arrival at 11:53 p.m. Patient statements as reported by first responder. Read, victim requested family be contacted. Victim expressed concern about being alone. Victim made statements to tell Clara I'm sorry and tell Clara I love her. Clara identified as victim's sister. First responder provided comfort and maintained physical contact, holding victim's hand, per victim's request, until loss of consciousness. Daniel's hands were shaking. He'd known all of this, had lived it, had given his statement to investigators while still wearing clothes stained with Sophie's blood. But seeing it written down in clinical language, seeing his actions reduced to bullet points in an official report, made it real in a way that memory sometimes didn't. He scrolled further, past medical examiner findings and toxicology reports on the drunk driver and witness statements. until he reached a section he hadn't expected to see. Victim's family statement provided by Clara Jane Whitmore. Sister. My sister Sophie was afraid of many things, but her greatest fear was being alone in pain. The fact that someone was with her, that Mr. Reed stayed with her and honored her request for physical comfort and reassurance, means everything to our family. We are grateful beyond words for his presence and his professionalism during an impossible situation. We do not hold him responsible in any way for Sophie's death, and we want him to know that his actions gave our family peace in the midst of our grief. Daniel had to close the laptop, had to set it aside and press his palms against his eyes and breathe through the tightness in his chest. Clara had written that statement 6 years ago, probably while still raw with loss, probably while planning her sister's funeral, and she'd used it to thank him, to explicitly clear him of blame, to tell him that what he'd done mattered. And he'd never known. Had never seen it because the file had been redacted, because he'd been too caught up in his own guilt and trauma to ask for the full report, because he'd walked away from emergency response and tried to leave it all behind. His phone buzzed. Another text from Clara. Clara, are you okay? Daniel stared at the message. How did she know? How did she know he'd opened the file? That he was sitting in his dark apartment at 10:47 p.m. processing information that was 6 years old but felt brand new? Daniel, I read your statement, the one from 6 years ago. Clara. And? Daniel, you thanked me. You specifically said what I did mattered. Clara. It did matter. It does matter. Daniel, I've spent 6 years thinking I failed her. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before Clara's response came through. Clara, you didn't fail her. The drunk driver failed her. The laws that let him drive failed her. The universe failed her. You showed up, and you tried, and you stayed. That's not failure. Daniel's vision was blurring. He wiped at his eyes roughly, frustrated with himself for crying over words on a screen, for letting this break him open again when he'd already done the crying thing this morning in the parking garage. Daniel, thank you for sending the file. Clara, thank you for reading it. I know it wasn't easy. Daniel, see you Monday at the meeting. Clara, see you Monday. Sleep well, Daniel. He wouldn't sleep well. He knew that already. Would probably lie awake replaying sections of the report, remembering details he'd tried to forget, processing the collision of past and present that his life had become. But he texted back anyway. You too. Then he closed his laptop, checked that Mia's door was still slightly open the way she liked it, and stood in the quiet of his apartment, trying to figure out how to be a person who'd survived the worst and was somehow still expected to show up to executive planning meetings on Monday morning. The weekend passed in the usual rhythm of single parenthood: soccer practice on Saturday, grocery shopping, laundry, helping Mia with a book report about dolphins. Daniel tried to prep for Monday's meeting, reading through the agenda Clara had sent and researching the topics up for discussion. Supply chain optimization was on the list, which meant he'd be presenting again. Also, quarterly budget reviews, hiring priorities, and something vaguely labeled strategic initiatives that could mean anything. Sunday evening, after Mia was in bed, Daniel pulled out clothes for the next day and caught himself actually thinking about what to wear. He'd spent 6 months in basically the same rotation of button-down shirts and slacks, never caring what impression he made because he wasn't trying to be seen. But tomorrow was different. Tomorrow he was walking into a room full of executives as an equal, not hiding in the background. And apparently that meant he cared about things like whether his shirt was wrinkled. He ironed it, just to be safe. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, October settling into that particular Pacific Northwest gloom that made 7 a.m. feel like midnight. Daniel got Mia to school on time, drove to Whitmore Industries, and parked on sublevel 3 out of pure habit. But instead of heading to his desk, he took the elevator straight to the 4th floor. The executive conference room was bigger than the ones on 3, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the industrial park, and a table that could seat 20. Daniel arrived at 7:55 a.m., early enough to set up his laptop, but late enough that several people were already there. Marcus gave him an approving nod from across the room. Jennifer from supply chain smiled and gestured to the empty seat beside her. And Clara, sitting at the head of the table in a charcoal blazer with her hair pulled back, looked up when Daniel entered and met his eyes with something that might have been encouragement. Morning, Daniel, she said clearly, making sure everyone in the room heard it. Glad you could join us. Morning, Daniel managed, taking the seat Jennifer had indicated and trying to ignore the way several executives were studying him with curiosity. The meeting started exactly at 8 a.m., Clara running through the agenda with efficient precision. Budget reviews came first, dry but necessary, departments justifying their spending and projecting Q1 needs. Daniel listened and took notes, contributing when questions veered into data analytics territory, but otherwise staying quiet. Then they hit supply chain optimization, and Clara turned to him directly. Daniel, walk everyone through the predictive scheduling system. Most of them have only seen the summary brief. And just like that, Daniel was presenting to the executive team, explaining the port congestion problem, the cost implications, the solution he'd built on evenings and weekends because the problem had interested him. He pulled up his dashboard on the main screen and walked through the interface, fielding questions about data sources and accuracy metrics and implementation timelines. This is exceptional work, said Robert Kim, the CFO, studying the projected cost savings. When can we have this operational? I'm targeting February 1st, Daniel answered. That gives us time to integrate historical data, refine the prediction algorithms, and run parallel testing against our current scheduling system. Make it January 15th, Clara said. I want this running before Q1 really kicks into gear. Daniel's mind immediately went to the additional hours that would require, the compressed timeline, the pressure. But he found himself nodding. I can make that work. Good, Clara said, and Daniel saw approval in her eyes. What do you need to make it happen? Dedicated IT support for the server infrastructure, Daniel said, falling back on the list he'd been mentally compiling all weekend. Direct access to Jennifer's historical shipping data, and probably someone to handle my other projects while I'm focused on this. Done, Clara said immediately. Then, to the room, this is priority 1 for operations. Daniel has full authority to pull resources as needed. Anyone he asks for help, you give it. Clear? The executives around the table nodded, and Daniel felt the weight of that mandate settle on his shoulders. Priority 1. Full authority. This was what leadership looked like from the inside. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, covering hiring priorities and strategic initiatives and a dozen other topics that Daniel absorbed while trying to look competent and engaged. When Clara finally adjourned at 9:30, people filed out in clusters, already diving into side conversations about their respective action items. Daniel was packing up his laptop when Clara approached. How are you doing? She asked quietly, low enough that the few remaining people in the room couldn't hear. Good, Daniel said, then corrected himself. Overwhelmed, but good. You handled that well, Clara said. The presentation, the questions, all of it. You belong in this room, Daniel. I've been here less than a week, Daniel pointed out. And you've already proven you can handle it, Clara countered. She paused, seemed to consider her next words carefully. I meant what I said in the email. You've earned this, not because of... She stopped, glanced around to make sure they had relative privacy. Not because of Sophie, because you're good at what you do. I know, Daniel said, and realized he actually believed it. Thank you. Clara nodded, professional mask back in place. My door's open if you need anything. Resources, support, just someone to bounce ideas off, okay? Okay. She left, and Daniel finished packing up his laptop. When he got back to his desk on the 3rd floor, there were already 3 emails waiting from people wanting to schedule meetings about the predictive scheduling system. His calendar for the next 2 weeks was filling up fast. This was his life now. Not hiding, not avoiding. Actually engaging with the company, with the work, with Clara. He opened his email and started responding, one message at a time, building something instead of running from ghosts. It felt strange, uncomfortable in places, but also unexpectedly, it felt right. The next 3 weeks blurred together in a rhythm Daniel hadn't experienced since his emergency response days. Intense focus, high stakes, constant problem solving. The predictive scheduling system consumed his days and most of his evenings after Mia went to bed. He worked with Jennifer's team to integrate 5 years of shipping data, collaborated with IT to build out server infrastructure that could handle real-time API calls, and wrote approximately 8,000 lines of code that had to work perfectly because Clara had staked the company's Q1 performance on his promise. The executive planning meetings became routine. Every Monday at 8 a.m., Daniel walked into that fourth-floor conference room and presented updates, fielded questions, defended his timeline against CFO Robert Kim's skepticism about whether January 15th was actually achievable. And every Monday, Clara ran the meeting with sharp efficiency while occasionally catching Daniel's eye across the table in a way that felt like checking in, making sure he was still okay with being visible instead of hidden. He was. Mostly. The hard moments came in unexpected flashes, Clara laughing at something Marcus said, and the sound hitting Daniel's ears with the same pitch Sophie's laugh had carried in the moments before the crash. Clara pushing her hair behind her ear in a gesture that was so familiar it made Daniel's chest tight. Clara standing by the windows during a break, silhouetted against gray November light, and looking so much like the photo from Sophie's memorial service that Daniel had seen in the redacted file that he'd had to leave the room for a minute to breathe. But he came back. Always came back. Because running wasn't an option anymore. And because the work mattered. And because somewhere in the past 3 weeks something had shifted between him and Clara from painful coexistence to something that almost resembled friendship. They didn't talk about Sophie, didn't reference the parking garage conversation or the incident report or the 6 months of avoidance that had preceded honesty. But they talked about everything else, supply chain logistics and data architecture, and Clara's frustration with the board's resistance to innovation. Daniel found himself staying after meetings to discuss implementation strategies, showing up to Clara's office with questions about resource allocation, even grabbing coffee with her in the fourth-floor break room while they reviewed budget projections. It was November 20th, 2 days before Thanksgiving and 3 weeks into Daniel's new role, when everything fell apart. Daniel was at his desk working through a particularly stubborn algorithm issue when his phone rang from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers were usually spam, but something made him pick up. Daniel Reed speaking. Mr. Reed, this is Patricia Henshaw with Henshaw & Associates. I'm a defense attorney representing Mr. James Kovac in a civil matter related to the March 2019 accident on Highway 89. Daniel's blood went cold. James Kovac, the drunk driver. The man who'd walked away from the crash that killed Sophie Whitmore while Daniel had knelt in the rain trying to save a life that was already lost. I'm not interested in... Mr. Reed, I'm calling as a professional courtesy to inform you that you've been named in a liability claim filed by my client. Patricia Henshaw continued in a voice that suggested professional courtesy was the last thing on her mind. Mr. Kovac is alleging that the medical response provided at the scene was inadequate and contributed to Miss Whitmore's death. Daniel couldn't breathe. The office around him, the normal sounds of keyboards and quiet conversations, faded into static. That's insane, he managed. She died because your client was driving drunk and crossed into oncoming traffic. My client maintains that he was not intoxicated at the time of the accident, Henshaw said smoothly, and that the failure of emergency personnel to provide adequate care is what resulted in Ms. Whitmore's death. We have expert witnesses prepared to testify that different medical interventions might have saved her life. I did everything right, Daniel said, his voice shaking. Everything by protocol. The medical examiner confirmed... The medical examiner's report is one piece of evidence among many, Henshaw interrupted. Mr. Reed, I'm not calling to debate the merits of the case. I'm calling to inform you that you'll be receiving formal notice of the claim within the next 48 hours, and that you should retain legal counsel. This is a substantial liability claim. Mr. Kovac is seeking damages in excess of $5 million. $5 million. For doing his job. For showing up and trying and staying with Sophie while she died and promising her she wasn't alone. This is a shakedown, Daniel said flatly. Your client killed someone and now he's trying to blame the people who tried to save her. My client is exercising his legal rights, Henshaw said. You'll have an opportunity to defend yourself in court. I suggest you start preparing. Good day, Mr. Reed. She hung up. Daniel sat at his desk, phone still pressed to his ear, while his brain tried to process what had just happened. A lawsuit, a liability claim. $5 million. His name dragged through court, his actions that night questioned and picked apart by expert witnesses who hadn't been there, who hadn't seen Sophie's injuries or felt her hand go limp in his or watched her eyes go fixed and empty. And Mia. How was he supposed to protect Mia from this? How was he supposed to maintain stability and normalcy and be the father she needed when he was being sued for $5 million for trying to save someone's life? Reed, you okay? Marcus was standing by Daniel's desk, concern evident on his face. You look like you just saw a ghost. I need to talk to Clara, Daniel said, standing up so fast his chair rolled backward into the filing cabinet. Right now. Is she in her office? Yeah, but she's got back-to-back meetings all afternoon. I need to talk to her now, Daniel repeated, already moving toward the elevators. He took the stairs because waiting for an elevator felt impossible. Climbed to the 4th floor 2 steps at a time, pushed through the executive suite doors, and walked past Clara's assistant with barely a nod. Mr. Reed, you can't just... The assistant started, but Daniel was already knocking on Clara's door and opening it before she could answer. Clara looked up from her laptop, surprise crossing her face. She was on a video call, her image in a small window showing the home office setup Daniel had seen in background during the executive meetings. I need to put you on hold, Clara said to whoever was on the other end, clicking a button that muted and paused the call. Then to Daniel, what's wrong? Daniel closed the door behind him and leaned against it because his legs felt unsteady. I just got a call from a defense attorney, he said. The drunk driver from Sophie's accident is suing me, claiming I provided inadequate medical care, seeking $5 million in damages. The color drained from Clara's face. What? James Kovac, the man who killed your sister. Daniel's voice was shaking. He's claiming he wasn't drunk, that the accident wasn't his fault, and that I'm responsible for Sophie's death because I didn't do enough to save her. Clara stood up slowly, her hands flat on her desk like she needed the support. When did this happen? 5 minutes ago. The attorney called me directly, said I'll receive formal notice within 48 hours. Daniel pressed his palms against his eyes. Clara, I can't afford this. I don't have $5 million. I don't have the money to fight a lawsuit like this. And even if I did, the publicity, the trial, having Mia dragged through, stop, Clara said firmly. She came around her desk and crossed to where Daniel was standing. Breathe, just breathe for a second. Daniel tried, failed, tried again. I did everything right that night, he said, and his voice cracked. I followed every protocol. The medical examiner confirmed it. The investigation cleared me. And now 6 years later, this bastard who killed your sister is trying to destroy my life because he doesn't want to take responsibility for what he did. I know, Clara said quietly. I know you did everything right. Everyone knows that. Knowing it doesn't matter if he can convince a jury otherwise, Daniel said. All he needs is reasonable doubt. All he needs is one expert witness to say, maybe I should have done something different. Maybe I missed something. Maybe if I'd been better, she'd still be alive. He was spiraling now. He could hear it in his own voice, but he couldn't stop. And even if I win, the legal fees alone will bankrupt me. I'll lose my apartment. I won't be able to provide for Mia. Everything I've built since leaving emergency response. Daniel! Clara grabbed his shoulders, forced him to look at her. Listen to me. This is not going to destroy your life. I won't let it. You can't stop a lawsuit. No, but I can make sure you have the resources to fight it, Clara interrupted. Lawyers, expert witnesses, whatever you need. Whitmore Industries will cover it. Daniel shook his head. You can't do that. It's not a company matter. It absolutely is a company matter, Clara said fiercely. You're my employee. You're being sued for actions taken in your previous career that have nothing to do with your current work. But more than that, she stopped, seemed to recalibrate. More than that, this is about Sophie, and I'm not going to let the man who killed my sister use you as a scapegoat. Clara, no. Her grip on his shoulders tightened. You were there for her when she needed someone. You stayed with her. You kept your promise. And I am not going to abandon you now when you need someone. Do you understand? Daniel's eyes were burning. He nodded because he couldn't trust his voice. Okay, Clara said, releasing his shoulders and immediately shifting into the decisive CEO mode Daniel had seen her use in meetings. First, we're getting you a lawyer, the best defense attorney in the state, someone who specializes in medical liability and knows how to shut down frivolous claims. This is going to cost, I don't care what it costs, Clara cut him off. Second, we're going to get ahead of this. If Kovac's attorney thinks she can pressure you into settling by making threats, she's badly mistaken. We're going to fight this aggressively and publicly, and we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person James Kovac is. The publicity could hurt the company, Daniel pointed out. Having your senior analyst named in a lawsuit, the company will be fine, Clara said firmly. You are not expendable, Daniel. Not to this company, not to me, not to your daughter. We're going to handle this together. There was a knock on the door, and Clara's assistant poked her head in, looking apologetic. Ms. Whitmore, your video call is still waiting, and you have the board presentation in 20 minutes. Reschedule everything, Clara said without looking away from Daniel. Clear my afternoon, and get me Michael Torres on the phone. Tell him it's urgent. Michael Torres, the attorney? Her assistant asked. Yes. Tell him I need him here within the hour if possible. It's regarding a liability claim against one of our employees. The assistant nodded and disappeared. Clara turned back to Daniel. Michael Torres is the best, she said. He handled some complex litigation for us 2 years ago. If anyone can shut this down, he can. Daniel felt unmoored, like he was watching this happen to someone else. You really don't have to. Yes, I do, Clara interrupted. Daniel, you gave Sophie peace in her last moments. You made sure she wasn't alone. That matters more to me than you can possibly understand. Her voice was thick with emotion. And beyond that, you're being targeted because you did your job correctly, because you showed up and tried to help. I'm not going to let that stand. What if we lose? Daniel asked quietly. What if a jury decides I should have done something different? Then we appeal, Clara said immediately, and we keep fighting until we win. But Daniel, we're not going to lose, because you did nothing wrong, and we have the evidence to prove it. Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that evidence and truth mattered more than a good attorney spinning a narrative. But he'd seen enough in his years as a first responder to know that justice and fairness weren't guaranteed. I need to figure out how to explain this to Mia, he said, the thought hitting him like a physical blow. She's 9. How do I tell her that someone's trying to blame me for something that wasn't my fault? How do I— One thing at a time, Clara said gently. Right now, we focus on getting you legal representation. Then we'll deal with everything else. She guided him to one of the chairs in her office and made him sit down, then grabbed a bottle of water from the small fridge in the corner and handed it to him. Daniel took it automatically, his hand still shaking slightly. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have just burst in here. You were in a meeting. I don't care about the meeting, Clara said. This is more important. She sat in the chair next to his instead of going back behind her desk, closing some of the professional distance between them. For a moment, they just sat there in silence. Daniel trying to process the fact that his life had imploded in a 5-minute phone call, and Clara clearly processing her own reaction to having the past dragged back into brutal, present-tense reality. Does this happen often? Clara asked finally. People getting sued for emergency response? More often than you'd think, Daniel said. It's why a lot of first responders carry liability insurance. I had it when I was active, but it lapsed when I left the field. He laughed bitterly. Figured I didn't need it anymore. Figured that part of my life was over. This is not your fault, Clara said firmly. None of this is your fault. Tell that to James Kovac's attorney. I will, Clara said, and something in her voice made Daniel look up. Actually, I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to make sure this gets thrown out before it ever sees a courtroom. Before Daniel could ask what she meant, her office phone rang. Clara answered it on speaker. Miss Whitmore, Michael Torres is on line 1, her assistant said. Put him through. Clara waited for the click, then said, Michael, thank you for taking my call. Clara, always a pleasure, came a smooth male voice through the speaker. Your assistant said this was urgent. What's going on? I need you to represent one of my employees in a liability claim, Clara said. He's being sued by a drunk driver who's trying to blame emergency medical personnel for a fatality that occurred 6 years ago. There was a pause. That's creative and completely baseless, I assume. Completely, Clara confirmed. The employee in question is Daniel Reed. He was a paramedic at the time, first on scene at a multiple vehicle collision. Did everything by protocol. The victim died from injuries sustained in the crash, not from inadequate medical care. The medical examiner's report confirms it. So this is a shakedown, Michael said flatly. Driver trying to shift blame to avoid liability. Exactly, Clara said. How fast can you shut this down? Depends on how much fight they want to put up, Michael said. But with solid evidence and medical documentation, I can probably get it dismissed in summary judgment. No trial necessary. Daniel felt something loosen slightly in his chest. No trial. That meant no jury, no prolonged publicity, no months of dragging this through court while Mia watched her father fall apart under the stress. What do you need from us? Clara asked. All documentation related to the incident, Michael said. Medical examiner's report, police investigation, witness statements, anything and everything. I also need to meet with Mr. Reed to go over his statement and prepare for depositions. You'll have everything by end of day, Clara promised, and Daniel is available whenever you need him. Good. I'll send over a retainer agreement this afternoon. Clara, what's the billing arrangement here? Whitmore Industries is covering all legal fees, Clara said. Send invoices directly to our legal department. Understood. Mr. Reed, if you're listening, I'm here, Daniel managed. Don't talk to anyone about this case except me, Michael said firmly. No statements to the media, no conversations with the opposing counsel, nothing. They're going to try to get you to say something they can use against you. Don't give them the ammunition. Okay, Daniel said. I'll be in touch within 24 hours to schedule our first meeting, Michael continued. Try not to worry. Cases like this rarely survive first contact with actual evidence. After they hung up, Clara turned to Daniel with an expression that was part determination, part barely controlled fury. I need to make another call, she said, and you're not going to like it. What kind of call? The kind where I contact James Kovac's attorney directly and make it very clear that if she proceeds with this baseless claim, I will personally ensure that every media outlet in the state knows exactly what her client did, Clara said. That the drunk driver who killed my sister is now trying to blame the emergency responder who tried to save her life. Daniel's eyes widened. Clara, that's strategic, Clara finished. Kovac is counting on you being isolated, scared, and unable to fight back. He doesn't know that the victim's sister is your employer and is willing to go to war over this. Her expression was fierce. I'm going to make him regret ever filing this claim. You don't have to. Yes, I do, Clara interrupted. Daniel, you've spent 6 years carrying guilt over my sister's death. Guilt you never should have carried in the first place. And now the person actually responsible is trying to make you pay for his crime. She stood up, and Daniel could practically see the CEO armor snapping into place. I'm not letting that happen. She picked up her phone and made the call before Daniel could protest further. It took 3 tries to get through to Patricia Henshaw, but Clara's persistence paid off. When the attorney finally answered, Clara put the call on speaker. Ms. Henshaw, this is Clara Whitmore. I'm the CEO of Whitmore Industries and the sister of Sophie Whitmore, the woman who died in the accident your client caused in March 2019. There was a pause on the other end. Ms. Whitmore, I'm not sure it's appropriate for us to— You called my employee today, Clara cut her off. Daniel Reed. Threatened him with a $5 million lawsuit for allegedly providing inadequate medical care to my sister. I informed Mr. Reed of a legitimate legal claim. There is nothing legitimate about this claim, Clara said, her voice cold and precise. And I'm calling to make sure you understand exactly what you're walking into if you proceed. Ms. Whitmore, first, Daniel Reed will have the best legal representation money can buy, paid for entirely by my company, Clara continued. Second, I have the complete incident file, including toxicology reports showing your client's blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit. Third, I have every intention of making this case as public as possible. I will personally contact every news outlet and tell them that the drunk driver who killed my sister is now trying to financially destroy the paramedic who held her hand while she died. That sounds like intimidation, Ms. Whitmore. That sounds like the truth, Clara corrected. And I'm prepared to share that truth as widely and loudly as necessary to protect someone who deserves protection. Daniel Reed did everything right that night. He provided exemplary care under horrific circumstances. And your client, your drunk, negligent, killer client, is trying to avoid responsibility by attacking a good person who doesn't deserve this. Patricia Henshaw was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was more careful. I'm simply representing my client's interests. Then represent them better, Clara said sharply. Because this lawsuit is going to fail, and when it does, I will make sure everyone knows it was a frivolous attempt to shift blame from a drunk driver to an innocent first responder. Your client's reputation will be destroyed. Your reputation might take some damage too. Is that really the hill you want to die on? Another pause. I'll need to consult with my client. You do that, Clara said. And while you're consulting, make sure he understands that I have resources, I have motivation, and I am not going to back down. This lawsuit ends badly for him no matter what. The only question is how much damage he wants to sustain in the process. Clara hung up without waiting for a response. The office was silent for a moment. Daniel stared at Clara, who was still standing with her phone in her hand, her expression fierce and protective and unlike anything Daniel had seen from her before. You just threatened a lawyer, Daniel said. I stated facts, Clara corrected. Everything I said was true. You basically declared war. Yes, Clara said simply, because they declared war first when they went after you. She set her phone down and looked at Daniel directly. I meant every word. This lawsuit is not going to destroy your life. I won't allow it. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Not just gratitude, though there was plenty of that, something deeper. The realization that Clara wasn't just helping him because it was the right thing to do, or because he'd been with Sophie, or because of some professional obligation. She was helping him because she genuinely cared about what happened to him. Thank you, he said quietly. I don't know how to... I can't... He stopped, overwhelmed. You don't need to thank me, Clara said, her voice softening. You just need to let me help. Can you do that? Daniel nodded. Yeah, I can do that. Good. Clara checked her watch. I have that board presentation in 10 minutes that I really can't reschedule. Are you going to be okay? I think so, Daniel said. I should probably get back to work anyway. Try to focus on something normal. Take the rest of the day if you need it, Clara offered. Go home, spend time with Mia, process this. Daniel considered it, but shook his head. If I go home now, I'll just spiral. Better to keep working. The scheduling system needs me anyway. We're 3 weeks out from launch. Okay, Clara said. But Daniel, if you need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. Doesn't matter if I'm in a meeting or at home or in the middle of the night, you call me. Understood? Understood. Daniel stood up, feeling steadier than he had when he'd burst into her office. Clara walked him to the door, her hand briefly touching his shoulder in a gesture that felt both professional and personal. We're going to get through this, she said firmly. Together. Daniel believed her. He went back to his desk on the 3rd floor and tried to focus on code, on algorithms, on the comfortable logic of data structures and API integrations. But his hands kept shaking, and his mind kept replaying Patricia Henshaw's words. Inadequate care contributed to death. $5 million. Marcus stopped by around 3 p.m., clearly having heard something about Daniel's dramatic entrance to the executive suite. Everything okay? He asked carefully. Personal issue, Daniel said. Clara's helping me handle it. Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay, let me know if you need coverage on any projects. Thanks, but I'm good. He wasn't good, but he was functional, which was close enough. Daniel left at 5:30 to pick up Mia, who bounced into the car with her usual energy and immediately launched into a story about her friend Emma's birthday party next weekend. Daniel listened and made appropriate responses while his brain ran on 2 parallel tracks. One focused on his daughter, the other spiraling through worst-case scenarios involving courtrooms and bankruptcy and losing everything he'd built. They had dinner, helped Mia with homework, did the bedtime routine, normal. Everything normal on the surface, while Daniel's life was quietly imploding underneath. After Mia was asleep, Daniel sat on his couch and finally let himself break down. Let himself cry the way he hadn't allowed himself to in front of Clara or Marcus or anyone else. 6 years. He'd spent 6 years rebuilding from that night, creating a stable life for Mia, finding work that didn't involve trauma and death and impossible choices. And now James Kovac was trying to tear it all down. His phone buzzed, a text from Clara. Clara, how are you holding up? Daniel stared at the message, trying to figure out how to answer honestly. Daniel, been better, been worse. Somewhere in the middle. Clara, that's fair. Did you tell Mia? Daniel, not yet, don't know how. Clara, you'll find the words when you need them. You're good at that. Daniel, am I? Clara, you told Sophie she wasn't alone. You told me the truth in the parking garage. You presented to executives who used to terrify you. Yes, you're good at finding the right words. Daniel felt his throat tighten. Daniel, thank you for today, for everything. I don't know what I would have done if… Clara, you don't have to finish that sentence. We're in this together now. They texted for another 20 minutes, Clara asking about Mia's school and the scheduling system and nothing about the lawsuit, giving Daniel space to be something other than a defendant. Eventually, Clara said goodnight and Daniel was left alone with his laptop and the incident report he'd pulled up, reading through his own statement from 6 years ago, trying to find any weakness that Patricia Henshaw might exploit. He couldn't find any. He'd done everything right, but sometimes doing everything right still wasn't enough to protect you from the consequences of someone else's wrong. Daniel closed his laptop and went to check on Mia one more time, standing in her doorway and watching her sleep with her favorite stuffed dolphin clutched in one arm. 9 years old. His whole world. The reason he got up every morning and kept trying even when everything felt impossible. He wasn't going to let James Kovac destroy this. Wasn't going to let a drunk driver's attempt to avoid responsibility take away Mia's stability or her father's ability to provide for her. Clara had said they'd fight together. Daniel was ready to fight. The system went live on January 12th, 3 days ahead of schedule. Daniel had spent the previous 6 weeks in a state of controlled chaos. Late nights after Mia went to bed, weekends where he brought his laptop to her soccer games and coded between plays, countless meetings with IT and supply chain, and anyone else who had data or insights that could make the predictive scheduling system better. The January 15th deadline Clara had set had loomed like a cliff edge, but somewhere around New Year's, Daniel had realized he was actually going to make it. More than make it. He was going to deliver something exceptional. The launch happened quietly, almost anticlimactically. 1 minute their shipping schedules were running on the old manual system. The next they were being optimized by algorithms Daniel had built from scratch. No fanfare, no announcement, just a switch flipped and data flowing through new channels. Daniel watched it from his desk, monitoring the dashboard he'd designed, checking error logs and system performance metrics. Everything was green. Everything was working exactly as intended. His phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "It's beautiful, thank you." He allowed himself a small smile before diving back into the monitoring. Beautiful was one word for it. Functional, efficient, profitable. Those were the words that mattered. But beautiful worked too. The following Monday's executive planning meeting felt different. Daniel walked in with the confidence of someone who'd just delivered a major project successfully, who'd proven he belonged in that fourth-floor conference room. Clara opened the meeting by acknowledging the system launch, and the executives around the table actually applauded. Brief, professional, but genuine. "We're already seeing improved delivery timelines," Jennifer reported, pulling up her own data. 3 shipments that would have been delayed by the old scheduling arrived on time last week. The system works. "Of course it works," Clara said, and her eyes met Daniel's across the table. "Daniel doesn't do anything halfway." The meeting moved into other topics. Q1 hiring, budget adjustments, a potential acquisition Clara was considering. Daniel contributed where relevant, took notes, felt himself settling into the rhythm of executive planning. It was starting to feel normal, being in this room with these people, being part of decisions that shaped the company's direction. Afterward, as people filed out, Clara caught his attention. "My office? 5 minutes?" Daniel nodded, ignoring the curious look Marcus shot him. He stopped by his desk to grab his laptop, then took the elevator to the 4th floor, where the executive offices occupied the entire south wing. He'd never been in Clara's office before, had actively avoided even walking past it for 6 months. But now he stepped through the open door and found a space that was somehow both impressive and personal. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the industrial park, a massive desk with dual monitors, built-in bookshelves lined with technical manuals and business books. And on one shelf, partially hidden behind a stack of reports, a framed photo of two women laughing on a beach somewhere sunny, Clara and Sophie, before. "You can sit," Clara said, gesturing to the chairs across from her desk. She closed the door behind him, which made Daniel's pulse spike slightly before he reminded himself this was just a meeting, just work. "The system launch went well," Clara continued, settling into her own chair. "Better than well. We're tracking to save about $4 million annually if performance holds steady." "It should hold," Daniel said. "The algorithms are designed to learn and adapt. The longer it runs, the better it gets." "I know, I read your documentation." Clara pulled up something on her computer, then turned the monitor so Daniel could see. It was his technical specifications document, complete with her annotations and highlighted sections. "You're thorough, almost obsessively so." "Is that a criticism?" "It's an observation," Clara said, "and a compliment. The board meeting is Thursday, and I'm presenting this system as one of our major operational improvements for Q4. I want you there." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Board meetings are executive level only." "Typically, yes," Clara agreed, "but I'm bringing you as the technical lead. They're going to have questions about implementation and capabilities, and I want someone there who can answer with authority." Marcus understands the business case," Clara interrupted gently. "You understand the system. You built it. You should be the one presenting it." She paused, studying him. "Unless you're not comfortable with that." Daniel wanted to say no, wanted to find an excuse to avoid sitting in a room with the company's board of directors while they scrutinized his work. But he told Clara he was done running, and that meant not running from opportunities just because they scared him. "I'm comfortable with it," he said, only half lying. "Good. Thursday at 2 p.m., 4th floor conference room. Dress code is business formal." Clara's expression softened slightly. "You'll do fine, Daniel. These people understand value when they see it, and you've delivered tremendous value." "I appreciate the opportunity," Daniel said, falling back on professional formality because he didn't know what else to say. Clara seemed to recognize the deflection for what it was. She changed topics smoothly, shifting into questions about the system's next phase development, about additional features Daniel thought might be valuable, about long-term vision. They talked for 30 minutes, and somewhere in that conversation, Daniel forgot to be nervous about being in her office. Forgot to see Sophie's ghost in Clara's gestures. Just talked to another person who understood complex systems and cared about building things that lasted. When he finally left, heading back to his desk with notes for the next development phase, he felt something that might have been contentment, or at least the early stages of it. The board meeting on Thursday was exactly as intense as Daniel had feared. 12 people around the conference table, all of them older than Daniel, most of them wealthy enough that their questions came with the weight of serious money behind them. Clara presented the quarterly results with practiced confidence, walking through revenue, expenses, operational improvements. When she got to the predictive scheduling system, she turned the presentation over to Daniel. He stood up, connected his laptop to the main display, and walked the board through the same demonstration he'd given the executive team. But this time the questions were sharper, more skeptical. The board members wanted to know about failure scenarios, about what happened if the system went down, about security vulnerabilities and data dependencies. Daniel answered each question methodically, pulling up technical documentation when needed, explaining complex concepts in language that balanced precision with accessibility. He could feel Clara watching him, could sense her approval, even though she stayed professionally neutral. After 45 minutes, the board chair, a severe woman named Patricia Chen, who'd made her fortune in manufacturing, leaned back in her chair and studied Daniel with the kind of assessment that felt like being X-rayed. "Mr. Reed, how long have you been working in analytics?" "About 7 years total," Daniel answered. 6 in emergency services data systems, 1 here at Whitmore Industries. "And before that?" Daniel hesitated, felt the room's attention sharpen. "Before that, I was a first responder, paramedic, and EMT." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's quite a career change." "Life circumstances," Daniel said simply, offering no further explanation. Beside him, he felt rather than saw Clara go very still. Well, your previous career's loss is our gain, Patricia said. This system is impressive work, Mr. Reed. The board approves continued development funding. She turned to Clara. Make sure he has whatever resources he needs. The meeting adjourned shortly after, board members filing out while making small talk about golf games and grandchildren. Daniel was packing up his laptop when Patricia approached. Emergency Services Data Systems, she said thoughtfully. That's where you learn to build predictive models? Partially, Daniel confirmed. We use them for resource allocation, predicting call volumes, optimal unit placement, response time optimization. Life and death decisions based on algorithms, Patricia observed. That takes a particular kind of mind and a particular tolerance for pressure. Daniel met her eyes steadily. Yes, ma'am, it does. Patricia smiled, brief but genuine. Good. Because if this system performs the way Ms. Whitmore projects, we're going to want you building more of them. Other departments, other applications. You might find yourself very busy. She walked away, leaving Daniel standing there processing the implications. More systems, other departments, a career trajectory that was suddenly accelerating faster than he'd planned for. Clara appeared at his elbow. That went well. Did it? Daniel's heart was still racing from the intensity of the questioning. Patricia doesn't give compliments lightly, Clara said. And she just told you she wants more of your work. That's as close to a glowing endorsement as you'll get from her. She paused. You handled the career change question well. Didn't overshare, didn't deflect obviously, just enough truth to satisfy curiosity without inviting more questions. Practice, Daniel said. Then before he could think better of it, does the board know? About Sophie, about me being there? Claire's expression shifted into something more guarded. No, that's private. Between us. She glanced around the empty conference room. Do you want them to know? No, Daniel said immediately. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page about what's private and what's not. We are, Clara assured him. Your past is yours to share or not share. I won't tell anyone. Daniel nodded, relief washing through him. The last thing he needed was the board or anyone else looking at him through the lens of tragedy. He was Daniel Reed, Senior Lead Analyst, builder of predictive systems. Not Daniel Reed, the paramedic who failed to save the CEO's sister, even if both things were true. The rest of January passed in a blur of development work and executive meetings. Daniel found himself spending more time on the fourth floor, more time in conversations with Clara about strategic direction and long-term planning. She'd started asking his opinion on things beyond analytics, vendor relationships, hiring priorities, operational philosophy, treating him less like an analyst and more like a trusted advisor. It should have felt strange. 6 months ago, Daniel couldn't even look at her. Now they were having lunch meetings in her office, debating the merits of different approaches to problems that ranged far beyond his official job description. But it didn't feel strange. It felt natural, like something clicking into place that had been slightly misaligned for years. On a Tuesday in early February, Daniel was working late at his desk when his phone rang. Mia's school, which meant something was wrong because they never called after 3 p.m. unless it was urgent. Mr. Reed, this is Principal Morrison. I'm calling because Mia got into an altercation with another student during after-school care. Daniel's stomach dropped. Is she hurt? No, she's fine, but the other child has a bloody nose, and we need you to come in tomorrow morning to discuss what happened. A bloody nose? Mia hit someone? That didn't sound like his daughter at all. Mia was shy, careful, more likely to hide than fight. It's complicated, Principal Morrison said in that careful tone educators used when they didn't want to assign blame over the phone. We'll discuss it tomorrow. Can you be here at 8 a.m.? Daniel confirmed and hung up, his mind already spinning through scenarios. He called Mia's after-school care, got confirmation that she was ready to be picked up, and headed out 20 minutes earlier than planned. Mia was quiet in the car, her backpack clutched to her chest. Her purple shirt, a different purple shirt, she had 3 of them now, slightly rumpled. You want to tell me what happened? Daniel asked gently. Tommy said something mean, Mia said, her voice small. About you. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did he say? That you're not a real dad because there's no mom, Mia said, and Daniel could hear tears threatening. That I'm weird for not having a mom. That his dad said single-parent kids are always messed up. Daniel had to take a slow breath before responding. And what did you do? I told him he was wrong, Mia said. I told him you're the best dad ever, and his dad is stupid. And then Tommy pushed me, so I pushed back, and then he tried to grab my backpack, and I... She trailed off. You hit him, Daniel finished. I didn't mean to make his nose bleed, Mia said, crying now. I just wanted him to stop saying mean things about you. Daniel pulled into their apartment complex parking lot and turned to face his daughter. Her face was blotchy with tears, her gap-toothed mouth trembling with the effort of not completely breaking down. Come here, he said softly. Mia unbuckled and scrambled into his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck and crying into his shoulder the way she hadn't done since she was much younger. Daniel held her, one hand rubbing her back, and felt his heart break a little at how fiercely she'd defended him. I'm not mad at you, he said quietly. Disappointed that you hit someone because we don't solve problems with violence, but I understand why you did it. Are you mad at Tommy? Mia asked through her tears. I'm mad at whoever taught Tommy that single-parent families are less than other families, Daniel said honestly. But that's not Tommy's fault. He's just repeating what he's heard. He pulled back enough to look at Mia's face. You know what we're going to do tomorrow? Get in trouble with Principal Morrison, Mia said miserably. After that, Daniel said, after we handle the consequences for hitting, which there will be consequences because violence isn't okay, we're going to talk about better ways to respond when people say ignorant things. Okay? Mia nodded, wiping at her eyes. Like what? Like telling a teacher, like walking away, like understanding that other people's wrong opinions don't change the truth. Daniel smoothed her hair back from her face. The truth is, we're a family, you and me. Just because we look different from Tommy's family doesn't make us less real. That's what I tried to tell him, Mia said. I know, kiddo, and I love that you wanted to defend me, but next time use your words instead of your fists. Deal. Deal, Mia agreed, then added hesitantly. Are you going to cry again? Daniel realized his eyes were wet. He wiped at them roughly. Maybe a little, because I'm really proud of you for standing up for our family, even if the execution needed work. Mia giggled wetly at that, and Daniel pulled her into another hug. They went inside and Daniel made grilled cheese for dinner because comfort food felt necessary. After Mia was in bed, he sat on the couch with his laptop and sent an email to Principal Morrison explaining that he'd be there in the morning and could they please ensure whoever Tommy's parents were would also be present because he had some things he wanted to say about what their child had been taught. Then he sat there in the quiet apartment and let himself feel the weight of single parenthood. The constant awareness that he was Mia's only parent, her only protector, her only safe place. That every decision he made rippled through her life in ways he couldn't always predict. His phone buzzed, a text from Clara. Still at the office. Saw your desk light was off early. Everything okay? Daniel stared at the message, debating how much to share, then decided that if they were building something like friendship alongside their professional relationship, honesty mattered. Daniel, kid crisis. Mia defended my honor by punching another student. Now I have to go to the principal's office in the morning like I'm the one in trouble. The 3 dots appeared immediately. Clara. Oh no. Is she okay? Daniel. Physically fine. Emotionally processing that violence isn't the answer even when someone's being a jerk about your family structure. Clara. Single-parent comments? Daniel. Apparently there are still people who think kids need 2 parents or they're automatically damaged. Clara. That's infuriating. How are you handling it? Daniel paused, surprised by the question. Most people would focus on Mia, on the immediate crisis, but Clara was asking about him. Daniel. Proud of her for standing up for us. Frustrated I can't shield her from ignorance. Worried I'm not enough. Clara. You're more than enough. I've watched you be a father, the way you talk about her, the way you structure your life around her needs, the way you left a career you loved to give her stability. That's not a man who's not enough. That's a man who's everything she needs. Daniel felt his throat tighten reading those words. Daniel. Thank you. I needed to hear that tonight. Clara, any time. And Daniel, if you need to take time tomorrow for the school meeting, take it. This is more important than work. Daniel, I'll be in after. I'm not missing the Monday meeting. Clara, I know you won't, but I'm giving you permission anyway. Be there for Mia first. Daniel set his phone down and sat there, feeling something shift in his chest. Clara wasn't just his boss, wasn't just Sophie's sister, wasn't just the person he'd been avoiding for 6 months. She was becoming someone he trusted, someone who saw him not just as an employee or a connection to her grief, but as a whole person with a whole life that mattered. It was terrifying how much that meant to him. The meeting with Principal Morrison went about as well as expected. Mia apologized to Tommy, Daniel apologized on her behalf, and Tommy's father, a man with the kind of aggressive posture that explained where his son learned his attitude, made it clear he thought Mia's behavior was a direct result of not having proper discipline in the home. Daniel had smiled tightly and said, "My daughter's learning that defending someone you love sometimes requires courage. I'm sorry your son is learning that bullying is acceptable. I hope you'll reconsider what you're teaching him about respecting different kinds of families." Tommy's father had turned red. Principal Morrison had quickly intervened to prevent escalation, and Mia had received a 1-day suspension for the physical altercation. Daniel took her to the science museum instead of leaving her home alone, and they spent the day looking at dinosaur bones and talking about better conflict resolution strategies. By Monday morning, Daniel felt wrung out but steady. The executive planning meeting was at 8 a.m., same as always, and he walked in at 7:55 with coffee and his laptop and the determination not to let his personal life show. Clara took one look at him and knew anyway. After the meeting, she caught him in the hallway. "How did it go?" "1-day suspension, which we converted into a museum trip and a life lesson," Daniel said. "She understands why violence isn't okay, but she still thinks defending our family was the right call overall." "She's not wrong," Clara said. "The method needed adjustment, not the instinct." "That's what I told her," Daniel confirmed. "Then, thank you for checking in, for caring about more than just whether I'd make the meeting." Clara's expression softened. "You've become important to this company, and—" She paused, seemed to choose her words carefully. "You've become important to me, not just as an employee, as a person I trust and respect." Daniel didn't know how to respond to that, didn't know how to process the way it made his chest feel tight and warm at the same time. "Lunch?" Clara asked. "My office, 12:30. I want to run something by you." Daniel agreed and spent the morning in meetings, barely able to focus because his brain kept circling back to Clara's words. "You've become important to me." What did that mean, exactly? Important how? In what way? At 12:30, he showed up to her office with takeout from the Thai place down the street because they'd fallen into that pattern, taking turns bringing lunch when they met to discuss projects or strategy or whatever else needed attention. Clara was at her desk, but she'd cleared space for them to eat at the small table by her windows. The framed photo of her and Sophie was still on the shelf, but Daniel found he could look at it now without feeling like he was drowning. "So what did you want to run by me?" Daniel asked, settling into a chair and opening his pad thai. Clara took a breath, set down her fork, and met his eyes with an expression that was equal parts nervous and determined. "I've been offered a speaking engagement," she said. "Tech Leaders Summit in March. They want me to talk about operational innovation and the systems we've built to improve efficiency." "That's great," Daniel said. "Good visibility for the company." "They want me to bring you," Clara continued, "as a co-presenter, to talk about the predictive scheduling system and the development process." She paused. "It's in Seattle, 2 days, hotel, and travel covered. And I'd understand if you said no, but—" "I'll do it," Daniel interrupted. Clara blinked. "You will?" "Yeah," Daniel said, surprising himself with how certain he felt. "The system deserves wider recognition, and if presenting it helps establish Whitmore Industries as an innovation leader, that's worth doing." "It would mean being away from Mia for 2 nights, Clara pointed out. "I didn't want to assume—" "My neighbor Mrs. Chen can stay with her," Daniel said. "Mia loves her, and she's offered to help if I ever needed it for work travel. This qualifies." Clara's smile was radiant. "Thank you. I really think this could be valuable for both of us. For the company." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Clara spoke again. her tone more hesitant. "Can I ask you something personal?" Daniel tensed slightly, but nodded. "When you look at me now," Clara said slowly, "do you still see Sophie?" The question hung in the air between them. Daniel set down his fork and considered how to answer honestly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "you have her eyes, and sometimes the way you tilt your head or laugh. It's like an echo of her. But mostly now I just see you, Clara, separate from her, your own person." He paused. "Does that make sense?" "It does," Clara said softly. "Because when I look at you, I used to only see the person who was there when she died, the connection to my worst night. But now I see Daniel, the brilliant analyst, the devoted father, the man who builds things that matter." She met his eyes. "I see my friend." Friend. The words settled between them like a bridge finally completed after months of careful construction. "Yeah," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. "Friends. I'd like that." Clara smiled, and this time there was no grief shadowing it, just genuine warmth. "Good. Because I could use a friend who actually understands what I'm talking about when I go on about operational efficiency for 30 minutes. Daniel laughed, surprising himself. "That's a low bar for friendship." "You'd be surprised," Clara said. "Most people's eyes glaze over after about 90 seconds. They finished lunch talking about the Seattle conference, about what topics to cover and how to structure the presentation. Normal things, professional things, except underneath it all was the growing awareness that they'd crossed some invisible line from colleagues bound by tragedy to people who actively chose to be in each other's lives. It should have scared Daniel more than it did. But sitting in Clara's office with winter sun coming through the windows and the comfortable rhythm of easy conversation, he found he wasn't scared at all. He was, against all odds and every expectation he'd had 6 months ago, happy. The happiness lasted until the following Wednesday, when everything fell apart. Daniel was at his desk, deep in code for a new analytics module, when Marcus appeared looking uncharacteristically grim. "Conference room, now! And you're going to want to bring any documentation you have related to March 2019. Daniel's blood went cold. "What?" "Legal issue," Marcus said shortly. "Clara's handling it, but they've asked for you specifically." Daniel followed Marcus to the 4th floor conference room on shaking legs. When he walked in, Clara was there with 2 people he didn't recognize, a man in an expensive suit and a woman with a leather portfolio. "Daniel," Clara said, and her voice was tight with controlled anger. "This is Richard Brennan and Lisa Yu. They're attorneys representing James Holloway." The name meant nothing to Daniel for a moment. Then it clicked with sickening clarity. James Holloway, the drunk driver who'd killed Sophie. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, though part of him already knew. Had always known this could happen. Richard Brennan opened his portfolio and pulled out legal documents. "Mr. Reed, my client is pursuing a civil case arguing that the fatal outcome of the March 2019 accident was not solely due to his actions, but was exacerbated by inadequate emergency response. Specifically, he's claiming that delayed and improper medical treatment by first responders contributed to the victim's death." The room tilted. Daniel grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "That's insane," he said. "I did everything by protocol. The medical examiner's report confirmed—" "We're aware of the medical examiner's findings," Lisa Yu interrupted smoothly. "However, my client is entitled to present alternative expert testimony suggesting that different response procedures might have resulted in a different outcome." "This is a desperate attempt to shift blame," Clara said, her voice shaking with fury. "Your client was driving drunk. He crossed the median into oncoming traffic. He killed my sister, and now you're trying to blame the person who tried to save her?" "We're simply exploring all contributing factors," Richard said with the kind of calm that made Daniel want to throw something. "Mr. Reed's name appears in the incident report as first responder. Our experts will review his actions and procedures." "Your experts can review whatever they want," Clara said icily. "Daniel's actions were exemplary. He gave my sister comfort in her final moments. He tried to save her life, and your client killed her. Those are the facts." "Nevertheless," Lisa said, "we'll be deposing Mr. Reed as part of our investigation, The subpoena will be delivered within the week. Daniel felt Clara's hand on his arm, steadying him. You'll get your deposition, Clara said, and then you'll lose this case, and your client will remain exactly what he is, a drunk driver who killed an innocent woman and is now trying to destroy the life of the man who showed her compassion in her final moments. The attorneys gathered their documents, offered professionally cold goodbyes, and left. Daniel stood there in the conference room, his entire body shaking, while the past 6 years of carefully constructed stability crumbled around him. Daniel, Clara started. I need to go, he said, his voice barely functional. I have to. Sit down, Clara said firmly, guiding him into a chair. Just breathe. You're having a panic attack. She was right. Daniel's vision was tunneling, his chest tight, his breathing shallow and rapid. Clara knelt in front of him, her hands on his knees, her voice steady. Look at me. Focus on my voice. You're safe. You're here, not there. This is 2026, not 2019. You're safe. Daniel forced himself to focus on her face, on her gray-blue eyes that were Sophie's eyes, but also Clara's eyes, on the present moment instead of the past. Gradually, his breathing slowed. The panic receded enough for him to think. They're going to destroy me, he said hoarsely. A civil case like this, even if I win, it'll be public record. Everyone will know. The board, the employees, Mia's school. His voice broke. Mia. She's 9 years old, and she's going to find out her dad is being accused of killing someone. You didn't kill anyone, Clara said fiercely. You tried to save someone. And I will make sure everyone knows that, starting with finding you the best attorney money can buy to fight this. Clara, you can't. Watch me, Clara interrupted. You think I'm going to let that drunk driver destroy you the way he destroyed my sister? Not happening, not on my watch. Daniel looked at her kneeling in front of him, her expression fierce with protective anger, and felt something crack open in his chest. Not breaking, just opening. Why? He asked quietly. Why do you care this much? Clara's expression softened, some of the fury giving way to something gentler. Because you matter, she said simply. To this company? Yes. But also to me. Because you've become someone I trust, someone I value, someone I... She stopped, seemed to reconsider her words. Someone I don't want to lose. The weight of those words settled over Daniel like a blanket, heavy but warm. I don't know how to fight this, he admitted. Last time, 6 years ago, I just walked away. Changed careers, started over. But I can't do that now. I have Mia to think about, this job, this life I've built. Then we fight, Clara said firmly. Together. We get you legal representation, we gather documentation, we prepare testimony, and we make sure the truth comes out, that you are not responsible for Sophie's death, that you gave her everything you could. Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that this wouldn't destroy everything he'd built. But sitting in that conference room with the weight of a civil lawsuit hanging over him and the past crashing into the present with devastating force, all he could think was that he'd been right to run 6 months ago. Some ghosts couldn't be outrun. They just waited for the perfect moment to drag you back under. Clara made good on her promise within 24 hours. By Thursday afternoon, Daniel was sitting across from Catherine Marsh, one of Seattle's most respected defense attorneys, in a downtown office that screamed expensive competence. Clara had insisted on coming with him, had cleared both their schedules without asking, and was currently sitting beside him like a shield against the world. Catherine was in her 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, and she'd spent the past hour reviewing the incident report, the medical examiner's findings, and the preliminary filing from Holloway's attorneys. This is garbage, she said finally, setting down the documents. Legally speaking, complete garbage. Holloway's team knows it too. They're fishing for a settlement. I'm not settling, Daniel said immediately. I didn't do anything wrong. I know you didn't, Catherine agreed. The medical evidence is crystal clear. Sophie Whitmore's injuries were catastrophic and unsurvivable. Even if she'd been injured inside a hospital with a full surgical team standing by, the outcome would have been the same. She looked at Clara. I'm sorry. I know that's difficult to hear. I've read the reports, Clara said quietly. I know what happened to her body. What I need to know is how we protect Daniel from this legal attack. We fight it, Catherine said simply. We file a motion to dismiss based on the medical evidence. We get expert testimony from the doctors who reviewed the case. We demonstrate that Mr. Reed's actions were not only appropriate, but exemplary given the circumstances. She turned to Daniel. I'll need your full cooperation. Every detail of that night, your training records, any documentation of the protocols you followed. Can you provide that? Daniel nodded, his throat tight. I kept copies of everything. After I quit emergency services, I thought... He stopped, swallowed. I thought someday someone might question whether I did enough, so I kept the records. Good, Catherine said. That shows you took this seriously, that you were thorough. It'll work in your favor. She paused, her expression gentling slightly. Mr. Reed, I need you to understand something. This case is going to dredge up everything from that night. You're going to have to relive it in depositions, possibly in court if it gets that far. It's going to be difficult. Do you have support? A therapist, family, friends? He has me, Clara said before Daniel could answer. And the full resources of Whitmore Industries, whatever he needs. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly at that, but she just nodded. All right. I'll file our response to the subpoena and begin preparing your defense. In the meantime, Mr. Reed, I strongly suggest you don't discuss this case with anyone except Mrs. Whitmore and myself. No social media, no casual conversations, nothing that could be twisted or taken out of context. I don't have social media, Daniel said, and I don't talk about that night with anyone. Except me, Clara added quietly. Daniel glanced at her, found her watching him with an expression that was part concern, part something he couldn't quite name. Except Clarice, he confirmed. They left Catherine's office with a plan of action and a timeline that stretched into April. Daniel felt simultaneously better and worse. Better because he had competent legal help, worse because the reality of the fight ahead was settling into his bones. In the elevator down to the parking garage, Clara finally spoke. You don't have to do this alone. I have a lawyer now, Daniel said, trying for levity and failing. I don't mean legally, Clara said. I mean all of it. The stress, the fear, the weight of reliving that night. You don't have to carry it alone. Daniel leaned against the elevator wall, suddenly exhausted. I don't know how to not carry it alone. That's kind of been my default setting for 6 years. I know, Clara said. Clara Tashab. But maybe it doesn't have to be anymore. The elevator doors opened onto the parking garage, and they walked to their cars in silence. Daniel was almost to his driver's side door when Clara called his name. He turned. She was standing by her own car, keys in hand, looking uncertain in a way he'd never seen her look in a professional setting. Do you want to get dinner? She asked. Not work dinner. Not strategy session dinner. Just dinner. As friends who could both probably use the company. Daniel's first instinct was to say no. He needed to pick up Mia. Needed to go home. Needed to retreat into the safe predictability of their evening routine. But he looked at Clara standing there, offering connection when he most wanted to hide, and found himself nodding. Okay, he said, but I need to call Mrs. Chen, see if she can keep Mia for a couple extra hours. Of course, Clara said. Take your time. Daniel called Mrs. Chen, his neighbor who'd become an unofficial grandmother to Mia over the past few years. She agreed immediately, said Mia was already there doing homework and could stay for dinner if needed. Daniel thanked her, texted Mia that he'd be a little late, and turned back to Clara. Where do you want to go? They ended up at a quiet Italian place in Fremont, the kind of neighborhood restaurant with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. Not fancy, not romantic, just comfortable. They ordered wine and pasta and sat across from each other in a corner booth while the weight of the day slowly lifted. Tell me about Mia, Clara said after their wine arrived. You talk about her at work, but I feel like I only know the outline. What's she actually like? Daniel felt himself smile despite everything. She's fierce, brave in ways I never was at her age. Smart, not just school smart, but emotionally intelligent. She can read people, knows when I'm upset, even when I try to hide it. He took a sip of wine. She's also stubborn as hell, which she definitely got from her mother. You don't talk about Mia's mom much, Clara observed carefully. Not much to say, Daniel said. We were together for about a year. The pregnancy was unplanned, and when Mia was 6 months old, her mom decided she wasn't ready for parenthood. She signed away custody and left. I've raised Mia alone since then. Claire's expression tightened with something that might have been anger on his behalf. That must have been incredibly hard. It was terrifying, Daniel admitted. I was 23, barely making it as a paramedic, suddenly solely responsible for this tiny human who needed everything from me. But it was also... He paused, searching for words. It was clarifying. Everything else became secondary to making sure she was okay. Every decision, every choice, every sacrifice, it all made sense because it was for her. Is that why you really quit emergency services? Clara asked. Not just because of Sophie, but because of Mia? Daniel turned his wine glass slowly, watching the candlelight refract through the dark liquid. Both. Sophie's death was the breaking point, but I was already cracking. Coming home at 3 a.m. after watching someone die, then having to get up at 6 to make breakfast and pack lunches and be present for a 3-year-old, I couldn't sustain it, and I realized I didn't want to. I wanted to be the parent Mia deserved, not the exhausted ghost of one. You made the right choice, Clara said firmly. Looking at who you are now, what you've built, you made the right choice. Some days it doesn't feel like it, Daniel said honestly. Some days I miss the work. Miss feeling like I was making a direct difference in people's lives. Building algorithms isn't the same as saving lives. But you are making a difference, Clara countered. The predictive system you built? It's going to influence supply chains across the industry. That impacts thousands of people, workers, consumers, businesses. Just because it's not as immediate as emergency medicine doesn't make it less valuable. Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that his current work mattered as much as his previous career. But there was a part of him that would always measure himself against that night on Highway 89, against the promise he'd made and couldn't keep. Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Clara told him about growing up with Sophie, about their competitive relationship that had softened into genuine friendship as they got older, about how Sophie had been the spontaneous one, the risk-taker, while Clara had been cautious and planned everything. She would have liked you, Clara said, twirling pasta around her fork. Sophie had a thing for quiet competence. She always said the loudest person in the room was usually compensating for something. What about you? Daniel asked. What's your type? The question came out more personal than he'd intended. Clara's eyes met his across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Apparently, she said slowly, people who build things, who care deeply but don't broadcast it, who show up even when it's difficult. She paused. People like you. Daniel's heart was suddenly beating too fast. Clara, I know, she interrupted gently. I know this is complicated. I know we have history that makes anything beyond friendship potentially problematic. I know you have Mia to think about, and I have a company to run, and neither of us needs additional complications in our lives. She set down her fork. But I also know that over the past few months, you've become one of the most important people in my life, and I don't know what to do with that. Daniel sat there, wine glass halfway to his lips, trying to process what she was saying. What she might be saying, what it could mean. I care about you, he said finally, carefully. More than I probably should, given everything. But Clara, I'm about to go through a legal battle that's going to be brutal and public and painful. I'm a single father with a 9-year-old who needs stability. I'm carrying 6 years of trauma related to your sister's death. I'm not... He stopped, frustrated with himself. I'm not sure I'm capable of being what you might need. What if I just need you to be you? Clara asked. Not perfect, not without complications, just you. The person who shows up, who tries, who cares. I don't know how to do this, Daniel admitted. How to be friends and maybe more, and also co-workers and also connected by the worst night of both our lives. Neither do I, Clara said. But maybe we figure it out together? One day at a time, no pressure, no expectations beyond honesty? Daniel thought about Mia, about what he'd tell her if she asked him about taking chances on things that scared you. Thought about the advice he'd given her after the Tommy incident about courage and defending what mattered. Okay, he said, one day at a time. But Clara, if this gets too complicated, if it starts affecting Mia or the company or your well-being, then we reassess, Clara finished. But we don't run preemptively. We trust each other enough to communicate when something isn't working. I can do that, Daniel said, and meant it. They finished dinner talking about the Seattle conference coming up in 3 weeks, about the presentation they'd need to prepare, about normal work things that felt safer than the emotional territory they'd just navigated. When Daniel finally picked up Mia at 8:30, his daughter took one look at his face and asked if he was okay. "Yeah, kiddo," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I'm okay. Just had a complicated day." "Did something bad happen at work?" "Something potentially bad," Daniel admitted, because he'd always tried to be honest with Mia within age-appropriate boundaries. "But I have good people helping me handle it." "Like Miss Whitmore?" Mia asked. "She's nice. You talk about her a lot." Daniel felt his face heat. "I do?" "Uh-huh," Mia said matter-of-factly. "You say Clara thinks or Clara suggested, like every day. Mrs. Chen says you probably like her." "Mrs. Chen needs to mind her own business," Daniel muttered, but he was smiling. "Do you like her?" Mia pressed. Like her?" Daniel looked at his too perceptive daughter and decided honesty was still the best policy. "Maybe," he said. "Is that okay with you?" Mia considered this seriously. "Will she be nice to me?" "Very nice," Daniel promised. "She actually wants to meet you sometime, if you're comfortable with that." "Okay," Mia decided. "But she has to like dinosaurs. That's important." Daniel laughed, the sound surprising him with how genuine it felt. "I'll make sure to mention that." The deposition was scheduled for late February, 2 weeks before the Seattle conference. Catherine had prepared Daniel thoroughly, running him through likely questions, coaching him on staying calm and factual, reminding him that his job was to tell the truth clearly and let the evidence speak for itself. The morning of the deposition, Daniel woke up at 4 a.m. with his heart racing and couldn't get back to sleep. He made coffee, reviewed his notes, and tried not to spiral into catastrophic thinking about everything that could go wrong. His phone buzzed at 6:30 with a text from Clara. "You've got this. Remember, you did everything right that night. The truth is on your side." He texted back, "Thanks. See you after." Clara had offered to come to the deposition for moral support, but Catherine had advised against it. Better to keep the focus on Daniel's actions, not on his relationship with the victim's family. The deposition took place in a sterile conference room downtown, with Holloway's attorneys on one side of the table, Catherine beside Daniel, and a court reporter taking down every word. For 3 hours, Daniel answered questions about his training, his experience, his specific actions on the night of March 14th, 2019. "Mr. Reed, when you arrived on scene, what was your first assessment of Mrs. Whitmore's condition?" "Critical. Multiple traumatic injuries, significant blood loss, signs of internal trauma. I immediately began stabilization protocols." "Did you consider the possibility that she should not be moved?" "She wasn't moved. I stabilized her in place while waiting for ambulance arrival. Standard protocol for traumatic injury with potential spinal involvement. But you did provide CPR, correct? Doesn't that involve moving the patient?" CPR is indicated when cardiac arrest occurs, which supersedes concerns about movement. Ms. Whitmore's heart stopped at 11:47 p.m. At that point, CPR was the only option with any chance of saving her life. The questions continued, circling and probing, looking for inconsistencies or admissions of doubt. But Daniel had the truth on his side, and 6 years of reviewing his actions in therapy and counseling had prepared him for this. He'd done everything right. The outcome had been unavoidable. When it was finally over, Daniel felt wrung out, but intact. Catherine walked him to his car. "You did excellent work in there," she said. "Clear, factual, unshakable. Their experts are going to have a hard time finding fault with your actions when the medical evidence so clearly supports you." "So what happens now?" Daniel asked. "Now we wait for them to realize they don't have a case and drop it," Catherine said. "Or we proceed to summary judgment and have it dismissed. Either way, I don't see this going to trial." Daniel drove back to Whitmore Industries, parked in his usual spot on sublevel 3, and sat in his car for a long moment processing the past 3 hours. He'd told the truth about Sophie's death in a legal setting, had defended his actions, had faced down the drunk driver's attempt to shift blame, and he'd survived it. His phone rang. Clara. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. It's over, Daniel said. Catherine thinks they don't have a case. They don't, Clara said firmly. Daniel, where are you? Parking garage. I was about to come up. Stay there. I'm coming down. 2 minutes later, Clara emerged from the elevator and crossed the concrete expanse to Daniel's car. He got out to meet her, and before he could say anything, she pulled him into a hug that was fierce and warm and exactly what he needed. You okay? She asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Yeah, Daniel said, his arms coming up to hold her back. Yeah, I think I am. They stood there in the parking garage, the same parking garage where 6 months ago Clara had finally confronted him, where everything had started to crack open, and Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Not resolution exactly, not closure, but acceptance. He'd faced the worst of his past, had defended his actions, had stood up for the truth. And Clara had been there, not as Sophie's sister, but as someone who cared about him for who he was now. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything, for believing in me, for fighting for me, for... He paused. For seeing me. Clara pulled back just enough to look at his face, her gray-blue eyes bright with emotion. I do see you, she said, all of you. The paramedic who tried to save my sister, yes. But also the father who restructured his life for his daughter, the analyst who builds brilliant systems, the man who shows up even when it's hard. Her hand came up to rest against his cheek. I see you, Daniel, and I'm not going anywhere. Daniel leaned into her touch, let himself have this moment of comfort and connection and the terrifying possibility of something more. I want to try, he said. This, us, whatever it could be. I want to try. Even though it's complicated? Clara asked. Especially because it's complicated, Daniel said, because nothing worth having is simple. Clara smiled, and it was radiant. Okay then, we try. They stood there for another moment, the parking garage humming with its usual mechanical sounds, before practical reality reasserted itself. I should get back to work, Daniel said reluctantly. I have the Seattle presentation to finish, and about 17 other projects that need attention. Me too, Clara agreed. But Daniel, tonight, after you pick up Mia, would you both want to have dinner at my place? I promise I can at least pretend to be interested in dinosaurs. Daniel laughed, the sound echoing off concrete. She'd like that. Fair warning, though, she'll probably quiz you extensively. I'll study up, Clara promised. They went back to work, back to meetings and emails and the normal rhythm of corporate life. But something had fundamentally shifted. Daniel found himself smiling at random moments, found the weight on his chest lighter, found himself looking forward to things instead of just enduring them. That evening, he picked up Mia and broke the news that they were having dinner with Ms. Whitmore. The one you like, Mia asked immediately. Yes, that one, Daniel confirmed. And she wants to get to know you, so be yourself, be honest, and if at any point you're uncomfortable, we leave. Deal? Deal, Mia agreed. Then, what if she doesn't like me? Impossible, Daniel said firmly. You're incredible. She's going to love you. Clara lived in a condo in Capitol Hill with massive windows and bookshelves that made Mia's eyes go wide. She'd ordered pizza because she'd admitted to Daniel earlier that she couldn't cook to save her life, and she'd bought a documentary about dinosaurs that Mia watched with rapt attention while the adults talked in the kitchen. She's wonderful, Clara said, watching Mia gesture enthusiastically at the TV screen. You've done an amazing job raising her. She makes it easy, Daniel said. Most of the time. After the documentary, Mia interrogated Clara about her favorite dinosaur, her job, whether she liked purple, and what she thought about single-parent families. Clara answered each question with perfect seriousness, and by the end of the evening, Mia had declared Clara pretty cool for a grown-up. Driving home, Mia was quiet for a few minutes before asking, Dad, are you happy? Daniel glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Yeah, kiddo, I think I am. Why? You smile more now, Mia observed, like real smiles. Not the ones you do when you're trying to make me feel better, but you're actually sad. Daniel's throat tightened. I didn't realize you noticed that. I notice everything, Mia said matter-of-factly. It's okay if you want to be happy with Ms. Whitmore. I won't be weird about it. Thanks, Mia, Daniel said. That means a lot. But if you get married, can we get a dog? Mia asked. That's my one requirement. Daniel laughed despite himself. We're nowhere near marriage. We're barely at the dating stage. Just putting it out there, Mia said, for future reference. 3 weeks later, Daniel and Clara flew to Seattle for the Tech Leaders Summit. They presented their work on predictive scheduling to an audience of about 300 people, and the response was overwhelming. Multiple companies approached them afterward wanting to know more, wanting to discuss implementation for their own operations. That evening, after the conference concluded, they had dinner at a restaurant overlooking Puget Sound. The conversation was easy, natural, full of laughter and shared stories, and the comfortable rhythm they'd developed over months of Monday meetings and lunch discussions. I have something to tell you, Clara said as dessert arrived. Catherine called this afternoon. Holloway's attorneys dropped the case, completely withdrew all claims. Daniel set down his fork, not quite believing what he was hearing. They dropped it? Their expert witnesses reviewed the evidence and refused to testify that you did anything wrong, Claire explained, her smile brilliant. Without expert testimony to support their theory, they had no case. It's over, Daniel. Actually, over. Relief crashed over Daniel so powerfully he had to close his eyes for a moment. Over. The legal threat, the nightmare of reliving that night in court, the fear of public scrutiny, all of it, gone. I can't believe it, he said. Believe it, Clara said, reaching across the table to take his hand. You're free. We're free. That night in the hotel hallway outside their respective rooms, Clara stopped him with a hand on his arm. Can I ask you something? Always, Daniel said. When you think about that night now, about Sophie, what do you feel? Daniel considered the question carefully, honestly. Sadness, still. Regret that I couldn't do more. But also, he paused, also gratitude. That I was there, that she wasn't alone, that I got to know her even for those brief minutes. An acceptance, maybe. That I did everything I could, that the outcome wasn't my fault, that I can honor her memory without being destroyed by it. Claire's eyes were bright with tears. That's what I feel too, about her, about what happened, about you. She stepped closer. Daniel, I know we said we'd take this slow, one day at a time, but I need you to know I'm all in. However complicated this gets, whatever challenges come, I want to face them with you. Daniel cupped her face in his hands, seeing Sophie's eyes, but also Clara's eyes, seeing past and present merging into something that felt like possibility. I'm all in too, he said. Then he kissed her, soft and certain, and felt the last pieces of the walls he'd built 6 years ago finally crumble. 6 months later, Daniel stood in Clara's condo watching Mia teach Clara the proper way to build a blanket fort while a golden retriever puppy, because apparently they'd gotten married faster than Daniel had anticipated, and Mia had immediately collected on her requirement, chewed enthusiastically on a throw pillow. You're terrible at this, Mia informed. The corner has to be anchored or the whole thing collapses. I'm a CEO, not an engineer, Clara protested, laughing. Dad, help her, Mia commanded. She's hopeless. Daniel joined them on the floor, helping secure the blanket fort while the puppy bounded around their feet. Later, after Mia was asleep in what had become her room in Clara's place, their place now, officially as of last month, Daniel and Clara sat on the couch with wine and the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. You know what I realized today? Clara said, her head resting on Daniel's shoulder. What's that? A year ago, we couldn't even look at each other. Now we're married, raising your daughter together, and building a life neither of us planned but both of us needed. Funny how things work out, Daniel said. Is it enough? Clara asked quietly. I know this isn't the traditional path. I know we're still figuring out how to blend our lives. I know there are hard days. It's more than enough, Daniel interrupted gently. Clara, you and Mia, you're everything. You're the life I didn't know I was allowed to have after everything that happened. We're allowed, Clara said firmly. We're allowed to be happy, to build something new, to honor the people we've lost while still choosing to live. Daniel kissed the top of her head, breathed in the scent of her shampoo, and felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. They were allowed. After the running, after the hiding, after the confrontation and the legal battle and the slow, careful building of trust, they were allowed to be happy. The past would always be there. Sophie's memory would always connect them, would always be part of their foundation. But it didn't have to be the whole structure. They could build something new on top of that foundation, something that honored where they'd been while reaching toward where they were going. Daniel Reed had spent 6 years running from the worst night of his life, and then he'd stopped running, had turned to face it, had found that on the other side of that fear was a woman who saw him completely and chose him anyway. A daughter who accepted love in whatever form it took, a life that was messy and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for. In the quiet of their home, with his wife beside him and his daughter safe in the next room, Daniel finally understood what healing looked like. Not forgetting, not erasing the pain, but learning to carry it alongside joy. Learning that you could honor the dead while choosing to fully live, and he chose to live. Every day, every moment, every chance he got, he chose to live.